It's quite bizarre. Get your money back, mate. Forget everything else. Anyway, what are you going to be talking about?
We're talking about the definition of Islamophobia story, which I know you've talked about a lot. There is already a definition, of course, as you know. But
I still think it's a made-up word.
Well, it's a completely made-up word. You know, an irrational fear of a religion, I don't think so. But nonetheless, the whole issues of whether it's blasphemy laws by the back door.
It is.
And it's really crucial to
And why Labour are doing it as well.
Yeah, and Angela Rayner, we know what's in her DNA in terms of the stuff she thinks, so she'd be quite happy that nobody talked about anything bad about religion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fantastic. Can't wait to listen. A big thanks to Claire Pistol. Thank you very much. Ian, up next, I'm Julia. This is...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. It is 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Welcome to the home of Common Sense. Thank you to Julia. She's back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. There's a load to wade through here. Angela Rayner planning to create a council on Islamophobia and free speech. But there are fears these are blasphemy laws that could be created here. How do you define Islamophobia anyway? We'll look at that. We've got some interesting people to speak to on this very issue. Meanwhile, it's been real. Keir Starmer's voice coach travelled between COVID tiers to visit the PM during lockdown. I don't think that takes him off the hook, by the way. Surely, if you're the recipient of a guest, you've both broken the law, right? We'll have more on that. And there is, quote, no evidence of murder in the case of killer nurse Lucy Letby. This is according to a panel of 14 experts with the Criminal Case Review Commission set to investigate a potential miscarriage of justice. Peter Hitchens, among others, and a leading criminologist will join us later in the programme. Everything you need to know and all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Help me out on this one. How do you define Islamophobia? I'm trying to think of the first time I heard the term Islamophobia. I remember it wasn't there at one point. It certainly wasn't there when I started this job. And I'm tempted to say it wasn't there 10 years ago. There's suddenly a proliferation of the use of this word. And this all comes to a head now because Angela Rayner is planning to create a council on Islamophobia. She's even got old Dominic Grieve. Remember him? The Brexit whinger, the Whingemeister General on Brexit. He's, of course, the former Attorney General. I don't dispute his legal credentials, but he's the man that's apparently going to head up the inquiry or the conclusions on this. So it's a 16-strong council. There's 16 people who are going to advise on having an official document drawn up for a definition for anti-Muslim discrimination. They will then provide advice to ministers on tackling Islamophobia. That's apparently what will happen. Mr. Grieve has been recommended to chair the council with Angela Rayner, her Housing, Communities and Local Government Committee, her responsibilities as the politician who's been actively involved in tackling Islamophobia. How do you define Islamophobia, by the way? And there's many reasons, and some of this, look, I can make no apology, there's some pretty delicate territory you've got to walk into here. And sometimes it will offend some people, no matter how many times you put the caveats in of not most Muslims, or we are talking politicised Islamism as distinct from Islam. You can say that all day long and somebody will turn around and go, yeah, it's Islamophobic, mate. What, are you going to report me to Angela Rayner because I dared to point out, as an example, that 90% of the 50,000 people on an MI5 watch list happen to be Muslims? I don't believe for one second they represent all Muslims or even most Muslims. But that still remains the case. Do you want to look at terror attacks in this country? Do you want to look at cultural assimilation? Would you like to look at practices and issues, sharia courts, first cousin marriage, you name all of those things? I'm making no judgment on them, but they are absolute factors that will be raised when people say, I think there is an incompatibility with this faith, or parts of this faith. Does that make you an Islamophobe? Which brings us to the big question as to whether or not this becomes blasphemy. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, said the government should drop its plans for such a deeply flawed definition of Islamophobia. Of course, we should tackle anti-Muslim hate wherever it occurs. But this definition is a Trojan horse for blasphemy law protecting a blasphemy law protecting Islam, and that's the point, isn't it? You should, I mean, my God, I think, condemning religion, or criticising religion, I should say, should not just be allowed, it should be taught in schools, for goodness sake. We should be teaching kids, absolute, of all things in life that you should question and robustly argue against. It is the practice of believing you have the answer to the meaning of life. I don't think that's controversial. That should be standard, key stage stuff in schools. When you're talking about debate and how to interlock and discuss, then religion should be right up there. I mean, Monty Python and others have satirised this stuff. They, of course, have had a price on their head back in the day with the life of Brian. People got very, very upset about that. Islam, or Islamism, is in the news quite a lot. Should that be? Absolutely, it should be criticised. Of course, people should have disquiet about this kind of stuff. The definition, at the moment, as I understand it, by the Labour Party, specified that Islamophobia is rooted in racism and targets expression of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. Is there anything wrong with that definition? That seems to get to the heart of it, because discrimination is discrimination. If somebody is being mean to somebody, ripping off somebody's hijab, or shouting terrorist or bomber in the streets to somebody who just happens to be a Muslim or look like a Muslim, then that's a problem, right? No one's going to endorse that. I don't want to see that kind of behaviour. But simultaneously, I don't want to see people in mosques preaching pretty dubious stuff. An investigation by this channel about a year ago revealed some of the stuff that still gets taught. So there are issues here. Cultural assimilation is a massive issue. Why would we not question that? We would question it with any other faith or any other issue. If I were to discover that there are parallel legal systems in other faiths, and I think there are some, I have equal condemnation of those as I do with sharia courts, as an example. There's no difference, absolutely no difference. Discrimination is discrimination, racism is racism. Condemn the whole thing, prosecute those that carry it out. That's very, very simple. Do I want a special case for Islam? No, I absolutely don't want a special case. And I can see thin end of a wedge written all over this. What is wrong with the current definition? And how do you define Islamophobia? 0344 499 1000. Let's go to work with Steve N. Allen, broadcaster and comedian with us. Afternoon to you, Steve.
Afternoon. Thank you for a topic that might get me not living as long as I
well, there is that.
Thank
yeah, tread carefully on this one, Steve, as we've told each other before we came on air. Let's have a look at this. Angela Rayner set to form this council on Islamophobia. That's what she intends to do, to help define what she calls anti-Muslim discrimination. Let's just have a reminder of something here. This is the Reform UK MP Lee Anderson pressing Angela Rayner on Labour's own definition. This was back in September. Here's what happened.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Secretary of State please explain to me and the House what the government's definition of Islamophobia actually is? Secretary of State.
Well, I say to the honourable member that a new definition must be given careful consideration so that it comprehensively reflects multiple perspectives and considers potential implications for different communities. And we're actively considering our approach to Islamophobia, including definitions, and we'll provide further updates on this in due course.
There it is. Well, the updates are coming in the form of a big council, 16 members to define and tackle the problem, Steve.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll help. We'll have that.
Why 16, by the way? I mean, what's wrong with 17 or 15? You know, what's going on here?
For the love of all that is good, pick a prime number so you can't have a stalemate. This is their first rodeo. Have they never done voting before? It's true. But yeah, look, it should already almost be the troublesome bits are already outlawed. Do you know what I mean? Of course, if you're picking on someone due to the ethnic part of this, well, that's racism, isn't it? We've got laws against that. If you are critiquing a religion, as you say, if we end up living in a country where you can't do a Life of Brian about the Islamic faith, then we've lost.
Yeah.
That's how this could fail.
100%.
And I'm not incredibly sure we're not going to end up in that situation. Look, what was that film, the film that was banned, and everyone was saying, like, oh, yeah, of course you should ban it because it's really offensive to Muslims. What? I'm sorry, that's effectively what happened back in the day with the Life of Brian. And thankfully, we got through it and we headed in the right direction.
Yeah.
If you can't critique a religion, then what you've done is you've given up the argument, haven't you? Like, oh, no, you can disagree with my religion, but if you do, you're the bad guy and I'm so offended that you've critiqued it. How about be a better religion? You know, have better beliefs that you could deal with silly old me saying I disagree with.
And I said at the beginning, Steve, I don't know if you heard that on the intro. I mean, this should be actively encouraged in schools. Of all things that you should be encouraged to criticise, you had to make a big fat list of things. You know, obviously the government of the day would be on there. Politicians as individuals would be on there. Religion would absolutely make the top three. You know, these are areas or notions or belief systems that claim and purport to know the meaning of life. I mean, if you can't criticise that, in physics, you would be encouraged to criticise anything that sort of got into that direction. The theory of evolution in the worlds of science is actively a cause for debate and discussion. Why would it not? So religion, I mean, it's right up there as being a prime and very ripe area, territory, to debate and argue and discuss.
I mean, you know, I love physics more than I love religion, so I'm going to double down on that one. Einstein, who's like everyone's hero of
hated him
to sort out. Well, Newton thought he was all that, wasn't he? Oh, he thinks he's all that. Einstein comes along, and then the rest of physics spends all of its time trying to prove Einstein wrong. Not because they're haters, not because this is some sort of thought crime or non-crime hate incidents against Germans or whatever. No, they just test the theory. How robust is your theory? Well, you need questions against it. But the idea that, and this is the problem. And that we didn't really have this problem when it comes to Christianity because no one tries to conflate an ethnicity of Christianity with a religion. Yeah. So if you're questioning the religion of Christianity, that's all you're doing. Whereas if you don't want to lose the argument, someone questions your religion, you go, oh, no, I think you've got a problem with my ethnicity. You're racist. You don't have to follow through on the argument.
Correct.
I know it's a very glib way of looking at it, but that's exactly the corner we've painted ourselves into.
Yeah, and it's always good arguing with a religious person. I've done this with a lot of very fundamentalist Christians about and somebody always comes back with that stupid answer. You'll be aware of this one, Steve. When you talk about evolution, they'll say, I think you'll find it's only a theory. No, that's the different use of that doesn't matter, okay? But that's the that's the road you go down, of course. But that's the beauty, isn't it? You're meant to be argue that against that, or there's other facets. There's a Venn diagram with all sorts of prime material in the middle of it. I mean, that's how it works. That's called debate. It's called a civilised world. We don't get killed or imprisoned or criminalised because of that.
And what I liked about theologians, I'm an atheist. I'm not going to be, shouting there.
Thank God for
I'm
that.
going to be supporting them. Yeah, hey, no. But what you like about theologians is they spend a lot of time thinking about it and questioning and trying to, they find the evidence that fits their point of view on it, but that's the way it's going to work. However, what we're moving into now is this zone of stopping the argument. If you question my religion, then that is offensive. Well, then you're not doing any thinking. You're not testing your own belief. And trust me, if you test your own belief and think about it a bit harder, you'll have better belief. I know, obviously, I somehow have hung out with more Christians than any other faith. I guess that's just been my upbringing. But by thinking about it and the questions from people like me, they end up strengthening their own belief. There are loads of scientists who are also religious. I'm not quite sure how they square that circle, although, quick sidebar, squaring the circle became possible as soon as we had transcendental numbers. It's not even a good phrase anymore.
Don't even go transcendental on us, Steve. That's always that's a road to ruin in these debates.
It isn't it? That's a good point.
Let's talk about Starmer, the voice coach who travelled between tears. That in itself is a show, right? Keir Starmer's voice coach allegedly went between the different tiers. This is December 2022 when we were tiered up. Of course, you could be a 3. You were 3 or 4? No, I'm a 2. Bro, you're a 2? How did you get a 2 in Cornwall? We're a 4 over here in Kent. That's how it went, sparking accusations of rule breaking, of course. Both deny any sort of wrongdoing, but if he's found out, let's remind ourselves of a clip from 2022 of Starmer pledging to resign if he was ever fined for breaching COVID rules. Here he is.
I'm absolutely clear that no laws were broken. They were followed at all times. I simply had something to eat while working late in the evening, as any politician would do days before an election. But if the police decide to issue me with a fixed penalty notice, I would, of course, do the right thing and step down.
So there it is. Now, I mean, they're interesting words, Steve, because there is a reasonable chance, based on everything we know, that Keir Starmer, I mean, literally and in the most demonstrable way, broke the rules. If somebody visited him during lockdown, crossing through tears, I mean, Julia was saying earlier, it might turn out, if this was all as it's been reported, that the voice coach, Leonie Mellinger, she'll be the one that gets fined because she broke the rules. But I'm pretty sure if somebody came to your house and they were in a different tier, you've got a responsibility as well.
Although I think the argument they're putting forward is that she was effectively a key worker, as this was an emergency, because I don't know if you've ever heard him speak. Sweet mercy, they needed to get someone in there to try and help him. Now, it feels like they didn't pick the right person. Look, obviously, I'm slightly miffed by this because during that period, I couldn't have a voice coach sent to me. Thankfully, I didn't need one, as I sound smooth. Whereas, I mean, he should get his money back, shouldn't he? Because that... Yeah. Unless she went in and thought, we really kind of need to make you seem like Mr. Bean could talk more. Could we do that? Could we aim for that? Look, I know why we're paying so much attention to Keir on this one. Yeah. He set himself up. At the time, when he was doing that, I thought he must be so sure he's not going to get a fine. He's willing to stick his neck out like that. Now I see that clip again, I think, there's a guy who doesn't really care if he keeps the job. He's got money in the bank. He's got the free suits. Yeah. He's having a swing at this. But you know what? If he has to resign, he'll be absolutely fine. I'm less annoyed by him. I'm less annoyed by her. I'm less annoyed by Boris Johnson. It was the stories of the parties with the suitcases of alcohol. Because my story on this one is I got married during lockdown. We couldn't have a party because, we weren't working for the Conservatives. Both my parents died during lockdown, so we had 2 funerals. Now, admittedly, I'm a Generation X bloke from the north. I wasn't going to hug anyone anyway, but we weren't allowed to. These are ridiculous things that I had to go through. Meanwhile, there was an attitude in government and politicians in general that, let's get a suitcase full of booze and have a great time. Yeah. Pick a side. Don't set the rules, or do set the rules and stick to them.
Yeah, spot on. And again, will he get his money back for the voice? I'm hoping. I want to see one of those episodes of Rogue Traders that starts off with, I don't know, Dominic Littlewood or somebody saying, "Meet Keir. Like many others, he sent off his money for voice coaching," and nothing happened. I mean, I'm sure That's being penciled in at a BBC meeting as we speak, but don't hold your breath. Listen, Steve, stay with us. Steve N. Allen, the broadcaster and comedian, is with us, looking through the big stories of the day. In particular, that Angela Rayner story on Islamophobia. How do you define Islamophobia? What is your take on it? And why do you sense there is a desire or a need for a new definition of this? I want to speak to you if you're a Muslim. I want to speak to you if you are perhaps practicing of other faiths and therefore maybe have a different kind of sympathy for a non-practicing person. And the overarching thought around this, that we need a council of 16 people to advise the government on what is Islamophobia and where will the line be drawn between, and I don't dispute the jip that people of different faiths and colours get in any country for that matter. I've never been there, you know, I'm a pasty white boy. I've never experienced any of that. So I have an understanding that to have that and have it relentlessly must be horrific. And as Steve just said, in most cases there are laws in place to deal with this. So why does something more need to be done? We'll look at that in more detail as well. Comments coming in from you. We'll talk about Labour's weakness on knife crime as well. And lawyers for Lucy Letby applying for that criminal case review. Details of that on the way as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. It's 20 minutes past 1.
They've got a lot more power to take on Donald Trump. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I don't think China are going to back down. That's the one thing that you know from them, is that they are pretty sure with all of the minerals, as you've said, which make all of the chips and solar technology
and mobile phones.
Yeah, so
none of the stuff we use.
No, everything we take for granted they've got. And so they'll just sit there and go, OK, fine, we're going to impose these rules on you.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is talk. This one in from Mike, who says, religion is the root of all the world's problems. By going down this Islamophobia direction, it's opening the door to even more domestic problems. We haven't managed the anti-Semitism problem, so opening the door to even more issues seems daft to me, although Labour think it will be a big vote winner. And Hilton says, of St Albans, criticising Islam cannot be racism because Islam is a belief system and not a racial group. That's very true, but attacking an individual person who happens to follow Islam would be seen as racism if your attack is clearly race motivated, which is why there's a lot to tuck into on this one. Steve N. Allen is with us, the broadcaster and comedian. Lots to talk through here, Steve, including another Starmer story. Starmer given dire warning as Labour's weakness on knife crime is exposed. Their stance has been slammed as weak and overly focused on prevention, with Reform UK positioning itself as the tougher alternative. Let's have a listen to London Assembly member Alex Wilson outlining their cost-cutting solution to tackle knife crime.
We've actually now found a way of funding exactly this targeted knife crime task force, which will be up to almost 1,000 officers, and the way we do it is by cutting back the mayor's staffing budget to 2016 levels. Nobody complained in 2016, at least I can't remember anyone complaining in 2016 that Boris didn't have enough staff when he was mayor and when he left office. And yet since then, Sadiq's headcount in City Hall has doubled and the cost has trebled. Yeah. So use that money to put that back into frontline policing, particularly to target knife crime, so we can do things like more stop and search, more weapon sweeps, and just a general increased police presence in those key areas where we're seeing these stabbings.
And Steve, this seems to be a big problem that Labour have at the moment. They're not very good at tackling the actual issue. So they can talk about prevention and, you know, we need to get into schools and work out what's going on in some of these homes or what the kids are looking at or what they're listening to. And, yep, that's great. Do all of that. But action at the coalface is what's lacking.
Yeah, it should be an and, not a but. It's as simple as that. All of the ideas that they list, yeah, great. They're all good. But at the moment, he says, using a but rather than and, disproving his own point, you've got people out there with knives. So how about you stop that and, there we are, get back into this education side of it. You know what? One of the things that I keep thinking about Labour, because I'm not a tribal politician type, political type person. I'm not like, oh, everything Labour does is terrible. Because if that's what you think, you know, you might be right most of the time, but that's more luck than judgment, really. That's your bias winning. But on individual cases, I'm just shocked at how badly they manage to do politics. The political scene at the moment, you've got Reform there, and even if you don't like them, you think they're populist. I'll tell you one thing that populists do. They have a keen eye about what's popular. That's part of how it works. Yeah. So if you were Labour, why don't you keep an eye out thinking like, hang on, this is an issue where they're doing better than we are. Maybe we should have another look at what we're doing. Why are we so unpopular in this? I mean, Keir's managed to get himself down the old the charts, you know, the survey of which politician you hate the most. That's what it should be called, because they're all negative numbers. Yep. And he's just getting lower and lower on it. Have a little look around. Why do you think people might have an emotional response to the stories of people being stabbed? Don't write it off as there being some sort of prejudice out there in everyday society. We're right. We don't want that to happen. So stop it happening. Maybe use, you know, some of that spare police prison capacity you sorted out by letting loads of criminals out. Maybe use some of that.
Well, isn't it also down to, I mean, you know, populism, it's interesting because it's kind of used as a pejorative most of the time. You know, it's just populism. And when you think about what it really means, you think, well, is that such a bad thing to be popular or have popular ideas? I know it's intellectually it is open to far more descriptive ways about what it really means, but broadly speaking, if you look at what Trump has done, if you look at the kind of delivery that Nigel Farage or Richard Tice, Lee Anderson and those guys, it's something not just about the policies that you're imparting, it's about how you impart them, it's about the belief. And when you listen to the front bench, the Labour front bench, all of them have been schooled in the kind of the Westminster style. There's a style book, a guidebook that says, right, this is how you present stuff. You get a special advisor to write a press release. You learn it. You have, you know, a couple of little sound bites in there, and then you reel it off. And the bit that's missing out of all of that, of course, is passion and belief, sort of an inner core that this is in your DNA and you're speaking on behalf of people. Very few politicians can do that, but that's the territory that Reform are hoovering up, and that's absolutely the area because Labour have a PhD in all of this. That front bench is terrible for all of that pre-rehearsed press release stuff. So they're failing on that because they don't sound as if they really believe what they're saying.
Yeah, I think it goes even further. So the difference between populism and popularity, you can find it. It's in the way in which it's used. You spot what the problems are, and the way in which you say what the solutions are would move you from popular to populism. But it doesn't mean that there's not a lot of overlap. In that Venn diagram, there's probably like a massive 80% overlap. That's the good stuff. And if you are small-minded enough to think, well, if reform like this, then we should hate all of it, you're ignoring that massive overlap of this would be a popular move. This is popular in the electorate. And I think Labour managed to go even worse than that, because they still have a whiff of the winning the argument rather than the election. Do you know what I mean? That they're willing to do something, and they're so sure that what they're doing is right, that they think if the headlines tell them it's horrible, if people say it's horrible, they still commit to the bit. And I mean, I know it's not just about the popularity contest of an election, but they keep coming round, and you should always keep your eye on them, because the next thing you know, you're going to have to be apologising for your track record over the last 5 years, and that never goes well. All of those polls that say reform's doing well, they really should say Labour is slowly shooting themselves in all of their feet.
100%. And this story as well, Steve. Lawyers for Lucy Letby have now applied to the Criminal Cases Review Commission to investigate her convictions as a potential miscarriage of justice. The announcement came just minutes before a press conference where her legal team claimed to have significant new medical evidence. Let's have a listen to Dr. Shu Li, a neonatologist whose 30-year-old paper was pivotal in the nurse's trial. This is him speaking this morning.
In summary, ladies and gentlemen, we did not find any murders. In all cases, death or injury were due to natural causes or just bad medical care. Lucy was charged with 7 murders and 7 attempted murders. In our opinion, the medical evidence doesn't support murder in any of these babies, just natural causes and bad medical care. Our full report will go to Lucy's barrister later this month, and then it'll be up to him and the courts to decide what next to do.
Well, we are going to be speaking to Peter Hitchens later, the journalist who's been following this and has very strong views on the case. I'll tell you what, though, Steve, when people first started talking about this, it was my neighbour that first said to me, I don't think there's any, he's got a legal background, he said, I don't think there's any evidence, literally, you know, physical, obvious evidence to link her to this. And he was kind of a bit confused and disturbed by, and I heard a few people say it, and I thought, well, you know, people always say that, and then people jump on that bandwagon. When you listen to a man with decades of experience in neonatal care, and a clinician of his standing, Dr. Shu Li, who was the guy we just heard from, and many others, you do start to go, hang on a sec, is there something here? Could there be what would clearly be one of the greatest miscarriages of justice ever?
Yeah, here's where I taught myself out of the job of opining on subjects in the news. But there are stories like this where the opposite of that would be someone like me sitting here saying, no, this guy who's got decades of experience in his specialism is wrong. And that happens a lot. Sadly, you do get people on radio and TV who think that, I read 2 news stories about this, I'm going to say this expert in the field is wrong. We do boil down to requiring the courts to do the job that we pay them to do. You know, I'm paying my tax because I want to live in a country that's got a system where a court can look at this in greater detail than I can. If anything, it raises questions about how easy is it to be on a jury and understand details that people with 2 decades worth of, you know, having a degree, a PhD in the subject get argued over. So, I mean, you can't really change the way our legal system works to that level, but that's what we're up against right now, isn't it? That it is so detailed. I was trying to prep for this earlier on, getting into the detail about how discoloration of the skin can be some sort of an indicative factor in air bubbles or not in the circulatory system. How am I going to understand that in comparison to someone who's made it their career?
Yeah, spot on. And you're right about experts. I can remember during the COVID period, I saw some fella on a documentary, one of the world's top microbiologists. I mean, this guy, nobody had a greater brain than this fella. We chased him around the world to try and find him and get him to come on the show. It took about 18 attempts, and eventually we got him on, and he explained, he wasn't pro or anti-vaccine, it wasn't about that. He was telling us about COVID, and he went through his whole thing and did a great, almost mini medical monologue on this. Extraordinary stuff. First caller, Bob in Arbroath. First comment from Bob, that bloke don't know what he's talking about. Brilliant. There it is. experts. Who needs them? Listen, Steve, thank you very much. Steve N. Allen with us on the programme. Over to you on that and a few other things as well, including that question we led with. How do you define Islamophobia? Do we need a council of 16 people to define it, therefore to advise the government and to stop bad stuff happening to somebody who happens to just have the audacity to follow Islam? I mean, nobody wants to see discrimination, racism and all the rest of it, but is it blasphemy laws by the back door, as many politicians are describing it? We'll talk to one man who has a big opinion on all of this. He's going to join us. He's Ali Malani, chair of the Labour Muslim Network. He'll join us in a few moments right here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Talk indeed, 2522. So let's pick up on this. Angela Rayner reportedly planning a new council to address Islamophobia and advise ministers on tackling anti-Muslim discrimination. Who wouldn't support the latter point there? Former Conservative Attorney General Dominic Grieve is tipped to chair the council, which will help define Islamophobia officially. Critics argue the current definition is too broad, restricting free speech and silencing valid criticism of Islam as a religion. Let's speak with Ali Malani, who's the chair of the Labour Muslims Network. Ali, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Nice to have you on. Look, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Current definition, Islamophobia rooted in racism targets expression of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. That's more or less what we're dealing with. It's in the dictionary as well. What's wrong with that?
Look, the definition has been contested within the Muslim community, but not broadly. The Muslim community, again, broadly has been supportive of the existing definition, as has the Labour Party. In fact, the Labour Party adopted the definition in opposition. It was brought forward by the party parliamentary group, the APPG for British Muslims, which at the time was chaired by Wes Streeting, now the Health Secretary. And so, you know, people like myself and broadly within the Muslim community, including the Muslim Council of Britain, have supported the definition. All definitions are imperfect, but have supported the definition broadly and think it's important that it be adopted as part of the programme to tackle Islamophobia and the rise of Islamophobia around the country. So, look, I think it's an important step, and it's positive to see that Angela Rayner and the government are beginning work to tackle Islamophobia, but many of us, including the Muslim Council of Britain, would point them towards the existing definition and urge them to adopt that officially in government.
And that's the one I just read, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What is their... I mean, why are they resisting that, as far as we know? And what are they urging should replace it?
So what has hit the news today is that there's going to be a new council of 16 people, potentially chaired by Dominic Greaves, that is going to look at the definition and adopt a new definition. I don't know personally what they want to change or what concerns they have about the existing definition, but presumably they want to do some more work, hopefully around alleviating a few of the concerns that exist within the Muslim community, although again, like I said, broadly, Muslim organizations have been quite supportive of the existing definition. So again, folks like myself would urge the government to adopt the existing definition. Look, definitions, by the way, are really important in being able to tackle something. You can't tackle something unless you've defined it. So we'll have to wait and see what this new council proposes. But I would again urge the government to look at the existing definition, which, by the way, the Labour Party was very happy to adopt position.
100%. Why do we need a specific? Racism is already illegal. If you are discriminating against somebody, if Bob tries to employ somebody, says, "Well, I'm not going to employ you. You're a Muslim, mate." That's illegal. All of that's if you punch somebody over the head, pull their hijab off, that's assault. All of these things are already there at the moment, Ali. Why do we need more?
Well, because, look, forms of racism manifest themselves in unique ways, and in order for authorities, whether that's government, the police, or others, to be able to act on specific forms of racism, they need to understand it. And again, with anything, in order to understand it, you have to first define it. Yeah. So the broad things that you're saying are correct. There are already laws if someone pulls someone's hijab off or pushes them in front of a train or a bus, as we've had cases of, that's already illegal. Or someone coming up to me and shouting abuse at me would already be illegal. But there are other forms in which Islamophobia manifests itself, which is important to tackle, and that begins through definitions and examples. Everyone is obsessed with the definitions, for the strict word of the definition, and that's important. But definitions also come with examples. If you look at the IHRA definition on anti-Semitism, for example, it includes examples, and what that allows authorities to do is measure complaints and measure incidents of any form of racism against a codified definition and examples, and that is extremely important.
And the difficulty or the challenge perhaps at the moment from some quarters is that look, this is kind of blasphemy law by the back door. If I want to criticise Islam, and I might base that on some unsavoury elements or Islamism as distinct from Islam, I may well find myself looking at grooming gangs. I might talk about 90% of the 50,000 on the MI5 watch list happen to be Muslims. I might talk about Manchester Arena, London Bridge. I might talk about women walking around with their faces covered who don't speak English as their first language and choose not to. Not illegal, but some would argue not great for social cohesion. I might talk about certain mosques that still preach hatred, homophobia and sexism, breathtakingly common. I might well talk about grooming gangs. That's been in the news. Clear small percentage of Muslims involved, but widely disproportionate in numbers on that specific type of sexual offence of grooming. Accusations of incompatibility, racial hatred, which can't be ignored. I might talk about a religion that has its roots in countries whose human rights records are stuck in, I don't know, 1567. Women's rights are non-existent. If you were gay, trans or anything like that, you'd be hanging from a rope. I might talk about in the last 20 years in this country, we've seen suicide bombings, arranged marriage, FGM, first cousin marriage, and of course the aforementioned grooming gangs. None of this existed before. I'm only giving you that list, Ali, but that wasn't off the top of my head. This was me having a look through our old friend Twitter today, just to see what kind of views are out there. And even allowing for hyperbole or a lack of context, if you put that together, you can see why some people might say, look, this is a faith that is profoundly at odds with Western values. We're not against somebody preaching it, but boy, are we going to criticise it. And those people, based on the kind of things I just said, will say, well, I should be allowed to criticise. Am I going to go to jail for criticising that lot? But that lot being the list I just gave.
Well, first of all, did you just say as part of your list that it's breathtakingly common for hate to be preached in mosques, or did I mishear that?
No, I said it was homophobia and sexism breathtakingly common.
Well, that's not true, first of all. But look, in terms of criticism of
Where
Islam,
would you be referring to? I mean, here or Pakistan or where?
well, if you're referring to mosques in the UK, there is absolutely no evidence that homophobia or sexism or misogyny are breathtakingly common. That's
okay.
just not...
Well, I mean, if I found you half a dozen videos of imams talking about the problem with homosexuality, would you refute those videos? Would you say that was AI or something?
No, but you meant the statement that it is breathtakingly common that we have homophobia and misogyny and sexism in mosques.
Okay, all right. Well, we can challenge that one and debate the twos and fros. But what I'm saying, I don't. My point was, if you look at people's perception of Islam, which is the kind of list that I just gave there, I'm not endorsing the list. I'm merely talking about the views that are out there. And many people will argue, well, look, there's enough evidence there to suggest there is a compatibility problem. And I want to criticise that. I want to criticise areas where I believe there is a lifestyle or a religion or a faith that is at odds with, I don't know, Western democracy, the UK, whatever you want to call it. If somebody criticises that, and I'm sure you wouldn't have a problem with that, Ali, if somebody said, look, I don't happen to agree that certain practices happen in that faith or this faith, we're allowed to do that, right? But this law, the suspicion is this law could suddenly crack down on just basic free speech.
Yeah, look, I understand that there is nobody reasonable in this debate that wants to see, reasonable theological debate or debates around Islam as a faith being made illegal or people punished for that. I will tell you that outright as someone who has been a leading activist in this country for tackling Islamophobia and the Islamophobia definition. So outright, that is nobody who I have spoken to's intention anywhere near government or within mainstream Muslim organizations. Nobody wants to make it illegal to criticize Islam or have a theological debate around the practices and beliefs that exists within the faith. That's not anyone's intention. What people's intentions are is to tackle the staggeringly high and rising rates of Islamophobia in this country. So the best way to put this as an example is you are absolutely free to criticize the doctrine or debate the doctrine of Islam. What you cannot do is discriminate against or target, be it violent or non-violent, people who practice the Islamic faith or any faith for that matter. So, people who are Christians in this country should not be targeted or discriminated against because of their faith. People who are Jewish or Hindu or indeed Muslim cannot be targeted as a result. I'll give you an example of this. Just in the month of January, we've had 7 sort of Islamic centers, mosques or schools who have been targeted with vandalism and Islamophobic hate speech being written outside them, things like "go home back to where you come from," things like that. These are things that we should be tackling. These aren't theological debates. They're not critiques of the doctrine of Islam. What they are is targeting Muslims, British Muslims, who are as part of this country and community as anybody else.
I get that, and everything you've just described is horrendous. Nobody's, I think of particularly, I've got young kids, and I think of, a little Muslim kid the same age as my little boy walking home from school, somebody shouting names. I'm a white guy, you're a brown guy, you would have had all that nonsense and it must be horrible, and I haven't. I get that. And nobody but a fool would wish to not recognise, racism and discrimination. But there is also simultaneously, when we see, I don't know, Batley Grammar School, a teacher shows some pictures of the Prophet, probably a very unwise thing to do. You got, 1,000 parents outside the school calling for this man's blood almost. He's got to go to jail. He's got to be this, we need to an investigation. A kid scuffs a Quran at school, and there's almost a sharia court assembled in a village hall somewhere where you've got a copper, an imam, you've got a counsellor, the mother begging for forgiveness, the imam saying, we're not going to let this one go, etc. It's that kind of thing that people see while sympathising with everything you've just said, and I don't know any decent person that wouldn't equally condemn, attacks on individuals and people. Of course, that's awful. But there is a confusion, Ali, a confusion when you look at things, the two examples I just gave, Batley and the other school, where people look at that and go, hang on, so what if somebody scuffed a Quran? Who cares if somebody scuffed a Quran? It's just a book, it doesn't mean anything to most people. It might do to you, it might do to others. If it's a Bible, who cares if somebody scuffed that? The reaction appears to be something that I wonder breeds this belief that Islam is increasingly incompatible. Now, that may be true, it may be false, but it's certainly a view people have, and that's the view people, understandably, want the right to retain. They want the right to it, even if they don't say it.
Yeah, no one's going after people retaining that view. Now, my own opinion, as you won't be surprised to learn, is that it is completely nonsensical and, to be honest, a laughable position to suggest that Islam is incompatible with life in the West. But we're not going to have that theological debate today, I'm sure.
Unless we talk about grammar schools, but let's not, as you say.
Well, yeah, we'll be here till dinner time.
Yeah.
I think, look, part of what you're saying is why a definition is important. People are, by nature, of all faiths, extremely emotionally attached to the faith that they follow and believe in. My experience, having worked with people of multiple faiths, that's not just unique to the Muslim community. The important thing is, once we're able to define this form of racism, then it provides a much clearer picture on what instances and what actions do violate that definition. And that's why the existing definition is so important. So I will give you an example. In the Labour Party, we conducted the first code of conduct on Islamophobia internally for the party. That was rooted in the APPG definition that already exists, the one that you read out at the beginning of this interview. And what that allows us to do is, rather than getting into the sort of hyperbole on either side around what is and isn't Islamophobia and the concerns around what you can and cannot criticize, it gives us a codified example and definition that's agreed upon to measure all complaints against. And that provides so much more clarity for people who want to know essentially where the line is drawn between real criticisms of doctrine and theology, which again nobody is trying to stop and criminalize, and targeting and bigotry towards Muslims. For every example that you've just read, and I would contest some, I wouldn't contest others, of instances where people have concerns around things that have happened, I can give you 10 instances in which Islamophobia has rooted itself everywhere from the mainstream media to Westminster to our streets, including people being mowed down by cars and killed just because they happen to be Muslim. So it's clear that something needs to happen and movement needs to be done. Yeah. The question is, how do we provide the authorities, the political system, you as a journalist in the media, the best codified examples to be able to measure something against without getting drawn into the weeds of what I often describe as really low IQ debates around these topics.
Got it. Listen, Ali, great to have you on, sir. Thank you for your time. Ali Milani is the chair of Labour Muslims Network. Your response to him, 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Our lines are open. This is Talk.
decision after decision was just so unconservative, in my opinion. And I'd seen the rot start a number of years before, you know, with the Conservative Party when they set something up called a A-list in the selection of candidates. And I do blame the selection of candidates a lot for what's happened in the Conservative Party, because if you look at the number of MPs that make up Parliament now, I would say that two-thirds of them are probably what I would describe probably more of a Liberal Democrat or Social Democratic Party bent.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Where is the line between what you can criticise and being a dodgy Islamophobe? Craig is in Oxford. On this very point, Craig, what have you got for us? Afternoon.
Yeah, I've seen it. As linguists go, I'm no Susie Dent, but my understanding of phobia is it's an irrational fear.
Yes.
And if Islamists in general have proven anything since 9/11 with their acts, their beliefs, and their ultimate goals, it's far from irrational to be concerned about a group of people that want to wipe out all other religions, seemingly. Not on their entirety, but at the sharp end. You know, so which makes the whole term Islamophobia a falsehood or a misrepresentation.
Yeah, and I do wonder whether, look, you know, you're not stupid, I'm not stupid. I don't for one second believe that the average Muslim in this country wants to do anything horrible to me or to you or anybody else for that matter. But we would be blind if we didn't acknowledge that there's a disproportionality in things that mark out Islam from other faiths at the moment. Now, some of that will be the media playing mischief. I totally get that. But if you want to look, and the figure I gave a second ago, and it is worth, and I'm even hesitant about saying this, Craig, in case people go, oh, you're doing exactly what the problem is. 90% of the tens of thousands, 50, 60,000 on the MI5 watch list are Muslims. Now, you'd have to say that that is a relevant factor in this debate about societal compatibility. Now, there might be politicised Muslims who practice a very strong and extreme area of their own faith. You know, and I get it, Christians in the deep south of America used to hang black people by the neck because they thought they were incompatible with decency and life. So I understand that extremists don't form the majority, but you'd still have to raise this, wouldn't you, as an issue of concern?
I think so. I think it's rational and reasonable to do so. And to just label anyone...
Craig, we've lost your line, Craig, on that very... But your line cut out. Don't know if you went through a tunnel past a bush or got your leg sticking out the car window, but we lost it. But I get your broad point of what you're talking about here. Paul says, is anyone working on a definition for Christianophobia? I didn't think so. Christians remain the world's largest religion, yet we see persecution of Christians across the Muslim world as well. We do indeed. But even if you stick to this country, my contention, which I hope even the keenest of liberal would identify, and I read out a list and I did a cursory look around social media, and I didn't just read willy-nilly stuff I wrote, because there was some, you know, pretty horrific stuff that was unpleasant and not true, but I took out areas that were true about kind of terrorism being an obvious example. Terrorism doesn't represent Islam, and no one's ever tried to suggest it does. However, those terrorists are themselves claiming to represent Islam. And if you look at grooming gangs, you'd be failing, if you were in a courtroom as a prosecutor trying to make this case, you'd be failing not to include that. You'd be failing not to include what is taught in some mosques. You'd be failing to not look at human rights records of other countries where the faith is based. Women's rights in particular, gay rights, non-existent. You'd be failing to not look at suicide bombings, arranged marriages, first cousin marriage. FGM got mentioned there as well. Of course you would mention all of that. Now that, again, you have to stress, fact, no one is saying that that represents all Muslims or all of Islam in any shape or form. But it's a disproportionality that I don't think exists in other faiths to the same level. So that's really the question. And that should be up for criticism. And you shouldn't get prosecuted if you want to criticise. Our lines are up. We'll take more calls on this in a couple of moments' time. First, news headlines at 2.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Indeed, good afternoon. Yes, welcome back to the home of common sense. You want to give us a shout out, 344 499 1000. Coming up this hour, we are discussing Angela Rayner's plans to create a council on Islamophobia and free speech. But there are fears this could be blasphemy by the back door. Your sense of what Islamophobia means, how would you define it, and how do you distinguish it between other forms of discrimination? And do we really need 16 people to tell us what being nasty looks like? Meanwhile, it's been real. Keir Starmer's voice coach travelled between COVID tiers to visit the PM during lockdown. He says nothing to see here. She says nothing to see here. So what did go on? We'll have more on that as well. And a new report claims voters across all demographics want tougher policing, criticising the government's softer stance on law and order, particularly prominent in knife crime. We'll have more on that as well. Everything you need to know and all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Ben says, since when is a phobia and hate mutually inclusive? I'm scared of spiders and keep away from them because they are known to bite people. I don't hate them because I don't understand their importance in the ecosystem and have respect for them. One here from Anne. Don't understand why we need a separate law for Islamophobia. The 2010 Equalities Act has 9 protected characteristics. One is religious belief. Surely that covers all religions adequately, says Amin Teesside. And Liam says, do Christian values set the foundations for our law? If so, allowing another religion to change laws could ultimately change the values of this country. There is something about this Angela Rayner powwow that doesn't pass the sniff test. I think that's probably the nearest I can get, which is what we're trying to define here. Let's get a word on this and all the other big stories of the day. Zoe Grunewald is with us, the political journalist and broadcaster. Afternoon to you, Zoe.
Good afternoon.
Nice to have you with us. I don't know whether you're an Angela Rayner fangirl. I'm going to take a guess, no. But she's out there today. It's another initiative. I don't know quite why this falls under the remit of the Deputy Prime Minister, but apparently it does. Setting out new rules, reference free speech and Islam, and she wants a 16-member council headed by Dominic Grieve to tackle the problem of Islamophobia, which is something I already thought we had. And most areas within it, discrimination, racism, assault, etc., are already criminal offences. What's your take on this, and do you sense we need a specific law?
Well, my understanding is that this specific plan is to create a council on Islamophobia, which would help provide advice to ministers on tackling Islamophobia. They haven't said whether they're going to adopt a specific definition. And I think that's the key thing, because as we know previously, there have been concerns over what a definition could mean for free speech, for blasphemy laws. We know in this country, I think it was under Gordon Brown, blasphemy laws were abolished, although you might correct me on that if I'm wrong. And there are, we join many other countries in not having blasphemy laws, which I think is generally a good thing. Obviously, we have seen Islamophobia rising in this country, as we have seen anti-Semitism rise, other forms of racism. And I think it is really important that the government take these things seriously and try and act on them. This is perhaps what this council is intending to do. We have to remember that Labour came under quite a lot of pressure from parts of the Labour base, which had Muslim communities and during the general election. So this may be a way of trying to speak to Muslim leaders about Labour's backing of the community and trying to prevent incidents of Islamophobia there. I think the reason this comes under Angela Rayner's particular wheelhouse is because she obviously does some work on housing communities and local government. So that would be why it falls under the communities bracket. But we've still yet to really see this council fleshed out. So we're still not really quite clear on exactly what it will do or whether it would look at readopting a definition of Islamophobia.
I wonder whether some of this ultimately comes down to sort of a cultural issue. I mean, we've got lots of different faiths in this country. Most rub along rather well. But there's been this kind of cultural clash. And I'm tempted to say that Islam and those that practice Islam practice through various conduits, as lots of faiths do. But the cultural aspect of it's more all-encompassing than, say, Christianity. Judaism, as I would say, which is obviously a religion you know well, I know has also a very big cultural base to it. I'm not just talking about Friday night dinner, but I'm talking about the whole issue of there being something, maybe with more tentacles to it as a faith, but doesn't seem to feel at odds. And I think just to take up and continue that example of Judaism, there's a real sense that Jews assimilating into other countries, certainly after the horrors of what happened back in the 30s, 40s and the like, happened rather seamlessly. And so that's something that hasn't quite happened in the same way with Islam. Is that a fair assessment? I'm slightly thinking out loud here on this.
I would say there's probably a slight overgeneralization there. I think there are plenty of people who practice Islam in this country who, you wouldn't, they in their eyes have assimilated to, whatever we perceive to be our cultural values. And really, I think there is a concern that actually for a lot of Muslims that Islamophobia is on the rise because of the sort of over-reporting of those cultures not assimilating. And I would say that there are issues amongst many different religions about whether, how they assimilate, whether they practice prejudices. I don't think that is specific to Islam. And I think we need to be kind of careful when we talk about it in those terms, because as we know, there are plenty of people who practice the Jewish faith, the Muslim faith, Christianity, who really just want to be able to practice their religion and get on with their life and they feel like they aren't, in any way trying to disturb whatever we consider to be British values, Western values. Having said that, as you say, we have laws in this country. So if somebody is in any way being practicing violence against women and girls, or any of those other things that we would would perceive as kind of against what we in this country hold dear. Then there are laws in place to prevent that. And I think there is more we can do in this country to talk to people and to try and get everybody on the same page with those kind of things. But I don't think it's a specific issue for Islamic communities, and I think it tends to be slightly overreported as such, when really what we need to do is fight the issues of violence against women and girls that spread across different cultures, other issues, that we see, rather than focusing on one particular religion, because when we do that, we do run the risk of creating hate and and prejudice and other kind of things like that in our society.
Okay, let's move to this story, Zoe. Keir Starmer's voice coach. I know everybody had a little chuckle when they first heard that sentence. Keir Starmer had a voice coach. I mean, what happened? Did they get fired, or did he get his money back? What happened here? But the story has kind of turned into something more here, because there is a possibility, and we don't have, maybe in the fullness of time, or maybe this story will just go away. But I've got the popcorn ready on this one, because there could have been breaches of COVID regulations, with the suggestion that the voice coach travelled between COVID tiers. Do you remember those tiers back in the day? Tier 4, Tier 3, Tier 2. What a miserable old time it was. Apparently travelling between tiers, which was not allowed in the rule book, which meant that somebody somewhere, either the voice coach or Mr Starmer, broke the rules. He's denied any wrongdoing, saying all rules were followed. And remember, this was a man that said if he was ever issued with a fine, he'd resign. So where do you think this story's going to go?
This is an interesting one. I was kind of looking up the rules on tiers before this interview, because I was really I couldn't quite remember it. I remember it being very complex at the time about, if you had to go to work, for example, and you lived in Tier 3 but you worked in a Tier 4 zone, were you allowed to travel? And although it says you shouldn't be travelling in Tier 4 without express purposes, for example, work, it does also say you shouldn't travel between tiers. So it's slightly confusing. Yeah. And so I'd be interested to know, if someone can genuinely provide well, I guess because it was new law as well, there wasn't a lot of precedent on it. So some people might have been, and we know this, the rules weren't always, the police didn't always enact the rules consistently across the country, which is another issue here. I think the problem here is whether or not Keir Starmer legally broke the rules, or his voice coach legally broke the rules. The question is, was it really necessary to have your voice coach travelling during a pandemic? Is it not one of those things that either could have been done remotely or could have been avoided at the time? And I think that is the question that Keir Starmer will have to answer. He was leader of the opposition. He was making an important speech during a pandemic. There are arguments that he could make for why he needed certain support. And I think his voice coach has said that she did this because she was a key worker. So that was that gave her the ability to travel between tiers. I think he will have to justify that. I think there is an argument for it, but I can see why the public wouldn't be convinced, because a lot of people had to give up a lot of things during lockdown. And I don't think a voice coach feels like something that he necessarily needed at that time.
Well, indeed. I mean, Boris Johnson got a ticket for eating a bit of Colin the Caterpillar cake at his own surprise party. I mean, there's a whole irony in there. I don't know how you're supposed to know you're having a surprise party, which consisted of about 3 people, one of whom was Rishi Sunak. I never believed he was a real person anyway, so he doesn't count. And Boris was there, had a quick sip of Coca-Cola and went back to work. Now, that got him a fine. I think Rishi got a fine out of that as well. If that is the same rules, I mean, because we had so many, as you rightly say, it was such a confusing time. We had lockdown, which was lockdown, and then we had a kind of diluted version of it, which was the tier system. I can't honestly remember which tier I was in, but it was, because it was that weird, wasn't it? All I knew, I was envious of people in a lower tier, or was it a higher tier? I can't remember which, but those that could go to the pub versus those that couldn't, etc. But Mr Starmer, of course, made great play about the government of the day, and maybe rightly so, breaking rules, whether they were big breaches of rules or whether they were minor ones. He was very vocal on it, and of course he did say in that speech, if I've broken any, if I get a fine, I'll resign. Now, if somebody reports this to the police, which apparently is what it takes to happen, and they say, yep, there is a breach, you've got a fine, Mr Starmer, do you think the PM's going to resign over this?
I don't know. I mean, as you say, he made a real kind of thing about being Mr. Rules, and that was very much kind of Keir Starmer's sell. I suspect that for this kind of thing, if the rule was broken, it would be his voice coach and not him. And I wonder how, you know, I don't know what the legal. I think the legalities here are pretty unclear. And if she was a key worker, then she probably didn't break any rules. But I think you're pointing to something which is really key, which has been an irritation that people have had, even Labour voters have had with this government, which is that they stood on a platform of really upholding the rules. And there have just been a number of missteps. So the freebie scandal, you know, that as well at the beginning of the government really kind of just tainted that. And although I do believe that it isn't, you know, it's not like it's a kind of government bringing down scandal. These things do chip away at public confidence. So I think Keir Starmer needs to learn from that and really get on top of this story quickly and provide his version of events so that we can kind of shut it down.
I think that's spot on. I mean, with the clothes and the free suits and the gifts, it wasn't so much, there was nothing illegal about that. You know, you can take money from a donor. However, the perception we were meant to have of Labour is that these guys didn't even know people who had that kind of money. You know, we don't know. The Tories know people who are we don't even know those kind of characters. And yet, you know, fast forward a few months and there's Sakir walking out with about 10 grand's worth of suit. And you think, wow, you were the bloke that said you were so different to the others. And you rightly say it's the chipping, so that the gradual ebbing away of trust, which has happened rather swiftly with this government.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do genuinely believe some of it is missteps, having not been in power for 14 years. I think some of it is people who feel like they are entitled to a certain level of treatment now they are in government. You know, I think when power gets gifted, there are always going to be people who take advantage of it in any government. But I think they really need to learn from the freebie stuff, because it did dent public confidence way too quickly. They should have got on with implementing their agenda, and instead this overshadowed it. And this shouldn't happen again. It's an important time in the government's calendar. They've got lots of legislation to get through. Crush this quickly, explain your reasoning, let the public decide, and then get on with governing. Yeah,
I'm intrigued to find out whether a voice coach is a key worker. Although, interestingly, a radio presenter stroke journalist, it was a key worker, believe it or not. Because, of course, you know, I suppose you're imparting the news. Is that, I don't know, but, you know, I found myself in that position. Maybe a voice coach to the Leader of the Opposition gets the same treatment. Who knows? We'll watch with interest. I want to bring this one in as well, Zoe. We mentioned it yesterday that the Scottish Nationalists were considering banning cats, which is the funniest thing I'd ever read, that they decided that cats are evil because they eat some birds and kill the odd mouse. But they've now rowed back on that and said they're not going to get rid of it. The First Minister, John Swinney, clarified that the Scottish Government has no intention of banning or restricting pet cats. I'm bound to ask, are you a cat or dog person, firstly?
I'm a cat person, and so you can imagine my face when I read this story, this dead cat story, so to speak. I think it's a really kind of extraordinary bit of news, and obviously, very wisely, John Swinney has shut it down, and it is quite funny in hindsight. But it kind of reminded me of, do you remember, because while we were on the topic of COVID, during or post-COVID, I think it might have been during the inquiry, a former Tory minister said the government at one point was concerned about transmission from cats to humans, and they were considering an order to tell people to euthanise their cats. Do you remember that?
Yes, I vaguely do. I'd forgotten about that. We'll look that up. And I mean, look, you're a cat person. Slightly disappointing, I'm going to have to say, Zoe, but you know, it's a free world.
I like dogs as well. I do like dogs.
Well, that's you redeemed yourself a bit there. We're not North Korea. We can like whoever we like in the pet world. However, I don't want to kill any cats or stop people from owning them. And you know, catching a mouse is kind of part of the gig of being a cat, isn't it?
Yes.
These people never seen Tom and Jerry, for goodness sake.
I'm not going to become the spokesperson for cats, and obviously,
I think you should.
I have an indoor cat, so she doesn't ever catch animals, which I'm grateful for, mainly because I don't want to have to clear up a dead bird, you know?
That's very true.
I wouldn't like it if I saw a cat killing a bird or a mouse, but, you know, it does seem to be part of their behaviour. And in some cases, and especially living in London, you might know that the best way to keep mice out of your house is to have a cat, because mice don't like the smell of them. So they are preventative as well as destructive, which I find quite useful here living in London.
So you are a mouse-free abode, which is
at present, yes.
Well, as far as you know, those mice are quite sneaky beast, so you never know where one might be lurking. Listen, Zoe, great to have you on with us. Thank you for your time. That's Zoe Grenewald, political journalist and broadcaster, with us on the programme. Over to you on all the various subjects we've got running here, including particularly that one about Islamophobia. I mean, the more you talk about this, and let's talk about it on a sensible level here. There's quite a lot to get into on this. I know that phrase multifaceted sounds like the kind of thing that Yvette Cooper would come out with during a Home Office speech, but it really is. There's loads of tentacles to this one. It goes all over the place if you start to think about it. How do you define Islamophobia? What do you think of the idea of getting 16 people together, which is what Angela Rayner is going to do, in order to define and tackle Islamophobia? What's not being tackled that is already illegal? And the idea that some people feel this will become a kind of blasphemy law by the back door, it's not an unreasonable position to take. Robert Jenrick is kind of advancing that view, and I think he's right on that, because we should be free to criticise religion in all of its forms. Discriminating against somebody, or racism against, attacking somebody because of their faith, or doing something horrible, all that stuff is already illegal, right? So why do we need more? Maybe you can tell me, and if you support it, I'm all ears at this end. 0344 499 1000. It's 20 past 2.
How is a voice coach a key worker? I mean, how on earth was that ever defined? Who made that definition? And, Sir Keir Starmer really owes it, just as all the others have done in the past. When they've been found out, he's got to own up and say exactly what happened. And I think you're right to keep attention on this matter. I know it's in the past, but ultimately it gets to one of the reasons why so many people in this country are frustrated about the way the country's going. It's because they put people into office who say one thing and then do something else.
Right.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
One in from Mick, how you doing, Mick in Walsall, who says, right now I feel like I'm living through a Monty Python sketch with this government, but unlike Cleese and co, this ain't funny, it's totally terrifying. Yes, there is that sort of feeling, right? Ian says, Islamophobia seems to say our rights are more important than your general rights as a UK citizen. This is why I object to defining this. And, you know, my point would be, and again, this is where you have to try and wear two tricky hats, because it takes nothing in this weird polarised world for someone to define you one way, even if you qualify it with all the kind of, no, I don't mean everybody, I don't mean all people. But if you look at terrorism across the Western world, most of it at the moment, and for the last years, many years, has been Islamist terrorism. Okay, if you look at this country, Manchester Arena would be an obvious example of death and carnage by those who purport to represent Islam. 7/7, quite obviously, London Bridge, Westminster Bridge, individual cases across Europe, our nearest neighbours, some horror stories. These are all well known. Gay nightclub in Florida. I mean, I could go on forever. Now, at what point, as, if you like, a Westerner, let's say a Westerner, would you not look at that and say, there's an issue here. There's an issue here. Now, it's not an issue with Islam, but it is an issue that will alter people's perception of it as a human reaction. Just that one example alone, that's before you get into anything else. Nobody with a brain thinks that that view is representative of most Muslims, because we all recognise that, you know, in any faith or practice or ideology, there are extremes, and there are people who take things to the ultimate extreme and believe they're doing God's work, even if it means killing themselves and others. We've seen that across faiths over the years. We all know this, right? But in recent times, in this country, the problem we have right now, and Christopher Hitchens talks brilliantly about this stuff, it's worth looking up some of his comments on this particular area. In recent times, that has been an Islamist problem. Okay, back in the day, it might have been a Catholic problem, but today it's an Islamist problem and has been for decades. And so when you look at those kind of, if you 90% of the 50,000 plus people on the MI5 watch list practice this stuff. Okay, I just mentioned the terror attacks. I mentioned a lack of cultural assimilation, language barriers, disproportionality in jails, employment, social housing. You could go through all of that, and there will be a point when you don't want to attack anybody for that, but you start to recognise what might be a pattern of either incompatibility or certainly a pattern that needs to be looked at. Now, yes, you can look at that. The question, or the reason this is relevant to the question of how do you define Islamophobia, because if everything I've just said is going to become Islamophobic, then we've got a problem. Angela Rayner has a problem. Simon is in Reading. What do you think, Simon? Afternoon to you.
Well, if I can just go around a little circle, and then you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, go for it. I
think the panel should go. I think the panel should go ahead. It's got some validity, but in a different way. Should be asking different questions.
Okay.
And I'll base it on these points. Firstly, when I voted, I was called far right for doing so. And I found that wholly insulting, as did a lot of people across the country. Yeah. So I can understand where the conversation about extremism and Islam can then filter through to practicing Muslims who are not extremist, and how insulting.
So you have you have a sense of how that feels for somebody to define you just on how they want to make themselves feel better. So they define you far right is a phrase that's annoyed me as well. So I get it.
Absolutely right. So if I think it's a time perhaps for actually a panel like this to forget the word Islamophobia, but just have another look at where does extremist Islam start, and the degrees of it, okay? And if they can do that and then educate the population with that, then you've got a better understanding of if you like, a foreign religion that you're not used to, but then you've got a better understanding of what is not tolerated in our liberal society in terms of that religion and its various gradients of indoctrination, let's say. So, for example, you could say, okay, we find we find, let's say, Sharia councils, we think that they're okay. However, there'll be an element saying, well, hold on a minute, they look at mostly things like marriage counselling and all that sort of stuff, but do they start to then discriminate against women in our Western democracy? And if they do, does that then become a little bit extremist? If that happens, what should we do about it?
Yeah.
And if you have that sort of graduated approach to it all, then the word Islamophobia will soon disappear, because everyone will understand what the Western values of Islam should be, and then they know where these lines are crossed. And it then would empower even Muslim ladies, let's say, for the example I was using, to actually then say, well, hold on a minute, well, I'm in a liberal democracy here. My rights as a female in a liberal democracy are being overrun by a Sharia council. Therefore, I should have recourse to actually talk to somebody else about this.
That's fair enough.
Do you see what I mean?
I do, and I was,
and
you know, I gave
Islamophobia would disappear.
And just to feed into that as well, in terms of examples of, you know, a lack of or a clash of whether it's cultures, religion versus freedom of speech, however you want to define it. And I'm going to mention the Batley Grammar School again, Simon, because I think it's an amazing example of where the problem lies. I think the example of the kid who scuffed the Quran at school is in many ways an even better example of the problem we have. That, to me, was a demonstrable example of a problem that we have with a clash of cultures and ideas. You know, when groups of parents in their dozens, if not hundreds, stood outside a grammar school, calling for the blood. Some were calling for the jailing of a teacher to go to jail because he did something that their religion doesn't like. A teacher that should be fired for the rest of it. This man is now in hiding for the rest of his life, by the way. So, you know, I think that is a genuine problem.
Yeah, but that's like that, if you like, is people taking the law into their own hands, or trying to. Yeah. And then perhaps a little bit more extremist view of a destruction of a religious document, let's say.
Yeah, indeed. But then the authorities not doing anything really about it.
Yes.
I mean, the local MP, Kim Ledbetter in Batley, has been pretty much silent on this.
And that's why, I'll swing back the circle, that's why if you had a panel to discuss this sort of stuff and say, OK, at what point does this particular, let's say use your example, become extremist on either side, OK, that is one of the believe it or not, you won't like this, but non-reported hate crime, that would be one of the examples where actually the police could get involved, they could talk to the parties concerned. And if we had a guidance on what is extremist on both sides of the divide, let's say, then actually they can come along and say, well, actually this is the position, this is what our UK law will say about it, this is what we will do about it, firm and fair, no favour whatsoever, and that's how we'll deal with that situation. And that situation, for example, was an apology, perhaps, okay, which I would say would be okay, an apology for inadvertently scuffing a religious document. But I would expect the same if a Muslim, let's say, schoolboy, scuffed the Bible.
There it is.
You know, and so it's equal both sides. So if you had meaningful discussion over this, and not just some arbitrary definition, then actually it will do good, because the public would know what is extremist, the authorities would know what is extremist. I mean, let's be fair, every example you gave, near enough, apart from the school kid, of the atrocities and stuff, is extreme Islamism, okay? It's not being a Muslim, it's extreme Islamism.
Yeah, and it's an interesting distinction, and there are clear clashes, and it just may be, what I sense is that there's a mobilised view of people who are saying this stuff is bonkers. I mean, there's obviously the fatal stuff, Manchester Arena 7-7, but then there's the other stuff, like the school teacher or the kid who scuffed the Quran, or, you know, views on things that, you know, feel like a cultural clash. There's those things to question that and say that's a bit weird in this country, that we don't have a problem with that, whether it's gay marriage or something else. Then you should be able to raise all of that, right? You should be able to raise it, Simon. You should be able to say, yes, I do have a problem with this. I think there's a problem. Why does female genital mutilation even feature in the pages of news these days? Why would arranged marriages, honour killings, well, why would any of that even feature?
I'll probably go on a bit further to say, actually, that, and it relates back to things like Southport and all this sort of stuff, yeah? Police and the services have only got finite resources. Do not bog them down with things like you don't need a terrorist wing to investigate somebody who scuffed the Bible. But if it goes too far one way or too far the other, that's what will happen.
There it is.
You need them concentrating on the most serious stuff, full stop.
On that point, Simon, it's a great call. Thank you very much indeed, Simon in Reading, on the issue. It's kind of free speech versus what is Islamophobia. Most of the stuff we'd apply to pretty much every faith or every characteristic. Nobody wants anybody to be hurt, insulted, racially abused, or discriminated against, or any of that stuff. And I think, as Brits, we kind of know that, don't we? That stuff is already illegal. But do you want the ability to be able to robustly criticise lots of other elements of any faith, for that matter? And the answer is emphatically yes. More calls from you on the way. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, 25 to 3. Let's move to this story then. New report claims that voters across all demographics want tougher policing, criticising Labour's softer stance on law and order. The Policy Exchange says Labour focuses too heavily on prevention and rehabilitation, with knife crime highlighted as a key weakness. Reform UK is gaining support from voters, demanding police prioritise serious crimes like murder and assault over non-crime incidents. Let's speak with Matthew Barber, Police and Crime Commissioner over there at Thames Valley. Matthew, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Do you recognise that analysis, firstly?
Well, I certainly recognise the sentiment. There are definitely issues. I think actually what frustrates an awful lot of people is the rest of the criminal justice system. There are definitely improvements I think that need to be made in policing, but what will frustrate police officers as much as the public is that when they will arrest and bring someone before the courts for some really quite serious and violent offences, that all too often we see that the sentencing doesn't necessarily match the crime. Now, for the public, they often don't differentiate between that. They say, well, the police need to do more. But ultimately, of course, the police, all they can ever do is arrest and investigate and pass those cases on to the CPS. But I think you're absolutely right, though. What we need, particularly to those issues around violent crime, is a really tough, no-nonsense approach to make sure that we are removing the risk. That is preventative in itself. I want to prevent crime rather than just clearing up the mess afterwards. But actually, you do that by being really tough at the start.
Do you sense that, I mean, obviously Labour are in power at the moment, Reform UK gaining support from voters because of a tougher approach to crime. Do you need politicians to do that? Your party, the Conservatives, you may not be a Conservative any longer, but I know you used to be. they of course, sit there in opposition. Do you sense that this is a job for Conservatives, or for politicians, I beg your pardon, to highlight with a fairly robust voice, as we are getting from Reform UK? Because it seems to resonate with quite a lot of people.
Well, I most certainly am a Conservative, and certainly locally here in Thames Valley, I've always been very vocal about that need to be really tough. So if you take knife crime, a couple of years ago now, I worked really hard with the force. We're very vocal against some resistance locally to say we really need to focus on knife possession. So in Thames Valley, a really tough approach to knife possession. We've increased the level of stop and search. We have some of the highest stop and search success rates across the country, so that when officers are using those powers, proportionately and appropriately, they're using it and they're finding drugs and weapons more often than other forces, because they're using those powers properly. And then when we get those weapons, we're making sure that people are charged, they're remanded in custody, and move through the system quickly. Because actually that's about being preventative. We're not waiting until the more serious incidents have happened. We're saying possession in and of itself presents a huge risk. It is a serious criminal offence, and that's where the police need to be focused.
In terms of where we go next, I mean, politicians can talk the talk, walk the walk. Crime commissioners can, talk about robust responses. What people want to see is action, right? I mean, if you don't see results and you don't get the sense that you're living in an atmosphere where politicians and cops and all the rest of it have your back, then everything falls down, doesn't it? There needs to be that real sense that someone means business.
There absolutely does. And again, I would point to the experience we've got here in Thames Valley. We have seen knife crime falling over the last 3 or 4 years. Not solely because of that, but partly because of the approach we've taken. And you said at the start, people want to hear less about crime prevention. Do you know what, actually, I think prevention is key. We all want to stop things happening in the first place. But one of the ways in which you do that is to show that there is a tough response and there are consequences to people's actions. And some of that is just moving swiftly. We often don't need to change the law. Politicians who always want to create new laws, that's often just an excuse for having some activity that looks good, but actually doesn't make anything different. All we need to do is move swiftly. There's huge delays and backlogs in our court system that need to be cleared through. When people are arrested by the police, there need to be some swift consequences, rather than people being out on bail for months. Certainly young people who perhaps don't understand the consequences of their action will often feel they've got away with it if they are released by the police, and it's months before there's any significant consequence of that.
Yeah, and that is the problem. I was just looking as well at some other numbers here. Worst train stations ranked by number of pickpocket offences last year. I know I'm just throwing this one at you, Matthew. I'm not expecting specific response on it, but yeah, if you look at things like King's Cross Underground is top of the list, 506 crimes. These are just the people that were caught. And largely, it is a lot of sort of London underground kind of stations. But they're the sort of crimes that people really sense get a free pass these days.
Yeah, I think there's a real issue. We've had the same with the sort of talk around shoplifting and offences like that. Policing over the last decade or so has tended to focus on what professional police officers might call high harm offences, rather than, if you like, traditional acquisitive crime. So your shoplifting, your pickpocket, your theft, your burglary, your vehicle crime. And actually, of course, important though the high harm offences are, and the police absolutely still need to deal with domestic abuse and violent offences and sexual offences. I wouldn't for a moment suggest that we don't need to do that. Thankfully, only a minority of people will be affected by those. The vast majority of people won't be affected by crime, but if they are, they're more likely to feel to be in fear of that traditional acquisitive crime. Having something stolen from your van, having something taken out of your pocket, being a victim of shoplifting, those sorts of offences, and that impression that people get that society's become lawless. firstly, I think that's wrong. I think there are actually some really good efforts being made by the police, but we need to build confidence. We need to be really robust with people. And to say those offences aren't okay, we're not turning a blind eye to them. And I think it's the role of police and crime commissioners and others around the country to be really clear that
that's true. But if I was just looking at your own patch, if I was pickpocketed at Reading Station and I called 999, there's no chance anyone's going to come out and help me, is there?
Well, I would hope actually at Reading Station you would get a really good response. And Thames Valley Police will work jointly with British Transport Police, who manage that rail network. And there has been some joint work there. For example, looking at things like bicycle theft, which we've seen a lot of on the railway line. So yeah, there's a reality about how quickly resources can be in the right place for those 999 calls. But we want to make sure that in those emergency situations where crimes are still being committed, that people are reporting them, because if they aren't reported, if they're not called in, then I can guarantee those are the jobs that the police won't attend if they don't know about them. So I'm really clear to the public in Thames Valley. I want them to be reporting things. I want to be calling on 999 if there's something still happening and it's in progress. It's not just about life-threatening situations. And you know what? If that means that our crime numbers go up, then that's fine by me, because I want the police to know what the actual picture is of crime out there. I want us to be able to address it. I want people in Thames Valley to feel safe. And not feel that they can't call the police if there are issues.
There it is. Matthew, thank you. Matthew Barber is the Police and Crime Commissioner over there at Thames Valley. It was interesting as well, just looking at that list of released by British Transport Police under a Freedom of Information request. Worst train stations ranked by number of pickpocket offences over 2024. In total, there were 13,841 offences were recorded at 953 rail and underground stations by the British Transport Police last year. The full list, by the way, was completely dominated by London stations, which may not surprise you. King's Cross at number 1, Finsbury Park number 2, Euston at number 3, Oxford Circus Underground number 4, Tottenham Court Underground number 5, and on it goes to number 20, St Pancras International Railway Station at 20. By the way, there was some representation for the North. Leeds, 80th place with 37 offences. I just reckon you would probably never think to report it, would you? If you looked in your... Unless you are one of those people that carries your phone in your back pocket as you walk around the streets in public. Firstly, you should be charged for crimes of idiocy, but plenty of people do it. If you have it nicked, would you really ring the police and say, I've just been pickpocketed? I've seen a couple of times. I saw somebody on the underground once try to grab a woman's purse, and there were kids, actually, because they often, gangs send kids out to do it. And somebody told the woman, and the kids ran off, and that was it. But this is going on all the time. But I don't know whether you'd get much of a police response on this. 0344 499 1000. Back to comments from you, Glenn in Colchester. Let's be frank, the tiptoeing around the discussion of Islam isn't for fear of offending, it's for fear of a violent retribution. I think that's one of the problems that the police have had, or law enforcement in general, and I include politicians, in that when it comes to protests, that you can have a protest and it can kick off and the police can respond. You could have two different groups protesting against opposing things and it could kick off. But if there is I don't know, a potential racial component to it, everything gets treated completely differently. It's not about two-tier policing in the conventional sense, it's about operational policing. It's gone on for years. Not, in fairness to Starmer, this is not a new thing in any shape or form. It's gone on for years. Think of the Brixton riots and goodness knows what else. I mean, not always gone off peacefully, of course. I just gave the example there. But if you're going to have a racial element to it, then that's where law enforcement do back off a bit, because the last thing they want not only is a race riot of some sort, but the accusation of racism is the big problem as well. 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. This is Talk.
how is a voice coach a key worker? I mean, how on earth was that ever defined? Who made that definition? And, you know, Sir Keir Starmer really owes it, just as all the others have done in the past. When they've been found out, he's got to own up and say exactly what happened. And I think you're right to keep attention on this matter. I know it's in the past, but ultimately it gets to one of the reasons why so many people in this country are frustrated about the way the country's going. It's because they put people into office who say one thing and then do something else.
Right.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This comes from Dan, who says, anyone from the right on today's show regarding the Islamophobia issue, or are your producers just getting all of the guests like Ali and Zoe on? I don't think Zoe is anywhere near from the left, by the way, Dan, just so you know. But that's a whole other thing. No, Ali was very specific to the subject, and I think pretty much most of our callers, or guests, as we like to see it, have kind of countered or responded to him. But I will pass on Zoe's comments. I'm sure she'll be delighted to hear that. This one comes in from Dave, South Gloucestershire. You've just highlighted the fundamental problem. If someone criticises someone, say for not doing their job at work, and that person happens to be a Muslim, is the person criticising automatically guilty of racism? If you're going to define Islamophobia or anti-Semitism or any other religious phobia, you have to separate and define anti-religious activity and racist activity. Being a Muslim is not a race, as any person born in the UK is British and not Jewish. Their Jewishness is a religion. We must not conflate religion and race, although Judaism is a recognised, being Jewish is a recognised race. That is a fact, whereas other faiths don't carry, and there's lots of historic and some might say complex reasons for that. But you're right, Dave. Just because you criticise somebody and they happen to be of a certain faith, that shouldn't automatically mean you're therefore criticising their faith. I mean, that would be bonkers. Kish is in Greater Manchester on this issue. How are you doing, Kish?
Hi, Ian. How are you?
Very good, thanks. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a lunacy, actually, in terms of... Because clearly, if you're setting up a council meeting with 16 members, you're not looking at anything other than broadening a definition, which already works, in my opinion.
Yeah.
As a former employment lawyer.
Right, so you know this territory, and if somebody was discriminated against because they happen to be a Muslim, that's already illegal.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you broaden the definition, you're opening the door to idiocy, really, because if you think about it logically, if you go back to the academic situation where you've got a teacher in Batley now in hiding, and maybe that will lead to other educational institutions avoiding discussing the Muslim faith for fear of upsetting the Muslim community or certain members of the Muslim community, then you might end up in a situation where they say, well, we'll just take it off the curriculum. So does that then become Islamophobic? Because you're not talking about it.
Yep. That's a good point.
And then, very briefly, the guest you had on the Labour Muslim spokesman, he sort of made the argument, really, for what you've been saying or alluding to, and what I'm saying, which is he started to... He made some very clear examples of what would be unlawful, which is everybody accepts as unlawful.
Yeah.
And then he started going down the train of, going through further examples. Well, you could have a list of as long as your arm of examples of what could be Islamophobic. But when you get into that territory, then it becomes ridiculous because you're effectively opening the door to anything being Islamophobic or seemingly Islamophobic. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to backfit the situation that we've seen, which is people turning up on doorsteps, the journalists, police turning up saying, "Oh, you've written hurty words that could offend the Muslim faith," or I don't know whether it was in that case, but I suspect it was. So it's all quite ridiculous, in my opinion.
It's more than ridiculous. I mean, it's off-the-scale stupidity. Listen, Kish, thank you for that. You make a good point. I referenced Christopher Hitchens a little earlier. I'm grateful to Ian, who's tweeted just a little slide. Hitchens' take on Islamophobia, a word created by fascists, used by cowards to manipulate morons. I like that. Mark in Lincolnshire, what's your take on this? Oh, before we talk, Mark, I just got to do this, OK? We've got the Voice of Doom. Now, the Voice of Doom, day 3. Is it day 3? Day 3 of the Voice of Doom. It's the political mystery voice. Who is this?
Things that were mistakes.
Things that was. I think I saw on my own social media yesterday, somebody did get it right. But if you want to WhatsApp and message us, 87222 if you want to have a crack. Don't phone in because there ain't no prize, kids. But you can take part. Here's the voice again.
Things that were mistakes.
87222 if you think you know who it is. If we get a correct answer, I'm sure we will. I'm sure we will. It's day 3 of this one. It's early doors, really. If we get a correct answer, we'll tell you who that is on the other side of the news at 3. If we don't, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here it is one more time.
Things that were mistakes.
Who's that then? Any thoughts? 87222. Mark in Lincolnshire. What have you got for us, Mark?
Hi there, Ian, mate.
Hi.
Hiya. Yeah, this whole Islamophobia, blasphemy, whatever you want to call this or look at it as. Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, I've got so many thoughts on this. I'm a practicing Christian traditionalist. I value my faith quite a lot, same as any Muslim would, you know. But what you're essentially doing, there's a few aspects, a few ways I look at this. One of them is, you're talking about creating a situation where, for example, is this going to mean that a Muslim can criticise my faith as a Christian, but should I turn back and criticise Islam, which has enough of its own things that you can criticise, believe you me, that they can then get me in trouble?
Well,
you know,
supposedly, the mood music is that you should still be allowed to criticise Islam, but where is somebody drawing the line? Where's the line of what you can't criticise that becomes this new law, potentially a new law of Islamophobia? Where is that line? Who draws that line?
Yeah, but the problem with it, though, Ian, is when you start talking about these kind of things, you create a chilling effect, don't you?
Yep.
Because what you're essentially doing is, well, you better not really say anything about it because you don't really know where the line's going to be crossed. Because you can bet your bottom dollar they won't make it clear where the line can be crossed. It'll be quite vague because that's where it always is.
Yeah.
The other issue with it as well is, the way I see this, is appeasement. You know, the problem with appeasement is you keep appeasing these kind of people. They will only want more. They will demand more appeasement. Otherwise, we'll not vote for you. Or wherever the bargaining chip that's being used is, that it'll just keep being thrown out till they can get more power or wherever it is they're after. You know, it's like the bully at school at the end of the day. You know, 1 week he's asking you for 50p a day, then a month later he wants £1 a day.
Yep.
You know, it's absolutely no different to that.
And that I think is the greatest concern of this, is that, you know, is it thin end of the wedge territory? And that's the, you know, I think what we need to guard against. And the fact we already have several definitions to define terrible and horrible things, some acts of criminality, some might be, if you like, ethically crossing a line that we all agree on. Most decent people would agree on. Nobody should be told they can't have a job because of their religion, or they can't go into a shop because of the colour of their skin, or they have no right to oxygen because of who they happen to be. I mean, all of that stuff is already illegal. Listen, Mark, I've got to run because the news is upon us. Will we get the right answer to the voice of doom in a few moments' time? You've got a few minutes to have a crack at this. Whose voice is this?
Things that were mistakes.
87222. We will reveal all on the other side of the news at 3 o'clock. Unless we don't get an answer, then it rolls over to tomorrow. We'll continue with your calls. How do you define Islamophobia? Your take on the latest response from the government with the council of 16 people. All of that and more. First, though, news headlines.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
It's a pretty packed hour on the way. We continue to talk about Angela Rayner's plan to create a council on Islamophobia and free speech. There are fears from some, Robert Jenrick advancing this line, that this could be blasphemy laws by the back door. Which one are you buying into? What are your take on this? And how do you define Islamophobia outside the rules that already exist about racism and discrimination? We'll have more comment from you on that. Also this afternoon, there is, quote, no evidence of murder in the case of killer nurse Lucy Letby. A panel of 14 experts claims, with the Criminal Cases Review Commission's set to investigate a potential miscarriage of justice. We'll look into that in a few moments' time. And Beijing has responded to Donald Trump's 10% levy on Chinese imports by announcing tariffs of its own on US goods like oil, gas and coal. Well, it was always going to happen. Does it cancel itself out, or are we in for trade wars like we've never seen before? Details are more on the way. 0344 499 1000. It's coming up on 4 minutes after 3 o'clock. The voice of doom. Before the news, we played you this voice.
Things that were mistakes.
Things that were mistakes. Did we get a right answer? These are some of the guesses. Christopher Hitchens. It does sound a little bit like Christopher Hitchens, but it's not. John Redwood, no. Gordon Brown, no. Malcolm Rifkin, no. Richard Tice, it is not. William Hague and Peter Hitchens, it is not. Dennis Healy, no. Zia Youssef, no. Elon Musk, no. In fact, we still haven't got a right answer. I'm really surprised. I didn't think that was particularly challenging, but it does roll over 2:45 tomorrow on the programme, day 4 of The Voice of Doom. Now, experts claim killer nurse Lucy Letby didn't murder any babies. A panel of 14 neonatologists say the infants died from poor care, not intentional harm. Let me just remind you, Letby is serving 15 life sentences for killing 7 babies and attempting to kill 7 others at the Countess of Chester in hospital. The Criminal Cases Review Commission is now reviewing her case for a potential miscarriage of justice. There's a lot of strong opinion on this. Let's speak with Dr. Hannah Quirk, reader in criminal law, King's College London. Hannah, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Nice to have you with us. This is one, I said this to somebody a little earlier when we were just having a cursory talk about this. This was one of those stories when I first heard people challenging or questioning what had happened. Some would say, well, there's not actually any literal evidence, tangible evidence to support the case. And I, sort of started thinking this is, a little bit tinfoil hat territory. This is what people often say in high-profile cases. Surely the might of a lengthy court case, along with goodness knows how many clinical experts, would not have appeared and made these statements and conclusions without some form of evidence. But as this has gone on, certainly culminating in today, there is now a very real, intelligent question about what happened, let's say what happened in this court case.
I'm not a fan of litigating these cases by press conference. There was a very lengthy trial. The jury heard a lot of evidence. That there wasn't, as the prosecution said at the start, there wasn't a smoking gun. It was an accumulation of evidence that they heard. As I think, as you said, it was problematic at the time. It seemed such an improbable case, and the fact there wasn't clear-cut evidence, I think people did have concerns. But the jury considered all that. They acquitted her on some counts. They couldn't agree on others. They convicted on some more. And this panel has given a press conference today. As I understand it, they haven't actually released the report yet. So it's not possible to see the basis on which they gave their report. But an application's been made to the Criminal Cases Review Commission. I think that's the proper way to do it. I don't think it should be a celebrity sort of trial by TV almost, because that's very dangerous.
Yeah. What is it that you, as a criminologist, you kind of have seen that makes you wonder why we're in this position that we are now?
I I think that we've had a number. Miscarriages of justice is my main research interest, and it sort of had fallen out of favour for a long time. People talked about criminals; they didn't really talk about the system getting it wrong. But we've had cases such as the Post Office scandal, Andrew Malkinson, the problems at the Criminal Cases Review Commission, and then programmes like Making a Murderer, Serial. It suddenly became something that podcast producers and TV programmes were interested in, and people felt very involved in these stories. I did a programme with some of the attorneys in Making a Murderer, and one of the audience questions we got was, what are the characters doing now? It almost felt like it had become like a reality TV programme. And that really struck me. So I think there are concerns about the case, and they need to be investigated properly. But the role of the experts is to give evidence on their field of expertise. So what was the cause of death, for instance? They shouldn't be commenting beyond that, or really commenting on her guilt or not. That's a question for the Court of Appeal to look at.
Indeed. So somebody mentioned to us yesterday that the defence didn't call any professional clinical witnesses on their side, which I hadn't heard that before, even despite reporting on it as much as we could during a trial. Obviously, there are limitations in what you can say. I wasn't aware that there wasn't a clinical defence given, which is curious considering there seems to be quite a lot of clinicians coming forward now.
It is curious. It can be that the defence had trouble getting experts, or it could be that there was something in the expert reports that they thought would be problematic if that came out at trial. Sometimes it's a tactical decision. I've not heard a suggestion that they didn't have the resources to do that. It was a very high profile, very carefully considered case. As you said, it's almost impossible to know all the details, given the length of, unless you actually sat there and went through the files and the transcripts.
You made some good comparisons of previous miscarriages of justice, and you mentioned Making a Murderer, which I think those concerned are still in jail, as I think I'm right in saying, because there was an appeal that kind of nearly went there for the younger guy, but then suddenly last minute was stopped, and that of course throws up more speculation about what is going on in the case. But the Post Office scandal, which one of our listeners did raise yesterday, is, I think, a really good example of where things can go wrong. I appreciate that hadn't at that stage got to any kind of legal position when things were going badly wrong, but the build-up to everything with the Post Office case, I suppose, led everybody with the same mindset. Surely something this big could not have happened on this scale to this many people at the same time, etc. Unthinkable. And in fact, if you made you made the documentary that was subsequently made about the Post, if you made it if there was no Post Office scandal, it would have looked unbelievable. People would have said, surely there's no way, one person would have spotted this. But of course there were, as we now know, and as you rightly say, podcasts and all sorts of other documentaries have really thrown light on why there's good reason sometimes to be suspicious. That just when you think something is impossible, it really isn't.
Yeah, and expert evidence is very difficult. You've got to put it in a way that the jury understand. And in, say, the Post Office case, for instance, people don't know how computer algorithms work. So you do need experts. I think what's really important is perhaps that we look at how the system works at the moment, because when the Court of Appeal is looking at a case, they say that evidence has to be new evidence that the defence couldn't have called at the time of the trial. So the obvious difficulty in this case is, well, her team chose not to call evidence, so that's quite a substantial obstacle to overcome. The Criminal Cases Review Commission can look at the case sort of in the round and conduct further investigations of its own, and if it goes back to the Court of Appeal, they will want to know on what basis were these experts instructed, what material did they look at, and whether or not then they think that the convictions are safe or unsafe.
I wonder, just on the basis of not specifically this case, but what we were talking about prior to this in terms of miscarriages of justice and things you think can't happen. One might be forgiven for thinking this point in the 21st century with all sorts of scientific techniques and capabilities that we wouldn't be in this place. Maybe there will be a day when we won't be. Things through all sorts of other mechanisms that we can never get things wrong. But I guess, it's hard to imagine, really, isn't it? Because so many cases that looked absolutely cast iron, airtight cases can fall apart. I remember being, sitting in the press gallery at a murder trial some years ago, and a very impressive scientist stood up and explained the forensics of, you know, why this person had killed. In this case, it was a child. It was a very disturbing case. And the judge gave a beautiful summing up to the jury, and he said to them, please remember that science is a version of evidence, a version of events, as distinct from the event. You know, you can look at probability, you can look at, you know, what is most likely. But I thought that was a very good way to put it, because you can be, juries in particular, can be seduced by, you know, a person with an impressive title who shows lots of slides showing, you know, there's no chance this could ever be the same DNA or the same piece of clothing, etc. Just when you think it couldn't be the case, it often could be the case.
It's really difficult for juries. I mean, I say to my students after about half an hour of lecturing them, like, how many of you, your attention's wandering now? And you can see them all jump. They're used to sitting in a lecture theatre and concentrating. A juror may not have been in that kind of environment for years. We're asking them to listen to very complex evidence, and it's difficult to evaluate competing stories. And that's one of the risks we have, is if you've got one expert who's very persuasive. It doesn't appear to have been an issue in this case, but you might remember Sally Clark, who was convicted of murdering her babies. There was a very compelling expert who stood up and said the chances of 3 babies dying from cot deaths in a middle-class, non-smoking family, you've got more chance of being struck by lightning. And you know, that kind of thing is very persuasive. So we need defence teams to have the ability to challenge experts, and perhaps the Court of Appeal to be more receptive to allowing expert evidence in where maybe the defence team's made a mistake.
Good point. And a performance of a good lawyer is key often to how juries do sway one way or the other. Listen, Hannah, great to have you on with us. We will speak again, I'm sure. Dr. Hannah Quirk, reader in criminal law, King's College London. Let's speak to Peter Hitchens, columnist, Mail on Sunday, regular with us on Talk. Peter, good afternoon to you. Look, you've been known for years for writing all manner of things around most areas of politics and cultural life and changes to our society. But here we have a case of a woman convicted of murder, 7 murders, 7 attempted killings. And you, pretty much from the beginning, felt something was adrift here, something wasn't quite right.
Not so much from the beginning, as the trial proceeded, and then when the verdicts actually came in, I just had a sense that something was out of balance in some way. It had been too emotional. There didn't seem to be any actual firm objective evidence that Miss Letby had done anything wrong, that she'd harmed anybody. There still isn't, as a matter of fact. And the more I looked into it, the more this alarmed me. I then wrote very briefly about it in the tiny interval between the end of the first trial and the announcement that there would be a second trial on one of the unresolved cases. And like everybody else, I was then unable to write about it for months, and so there was a sort of downburst by the time it came out. And there'd been an extraordinary article in the New Yorker, which you probably read, by Rachel Aviv, which took the whole thing into a different sphere by its forensic work. And since then, really, I've been very much of the view that the conviction isn't safe and the case should be reopened for the sake of justice.
Do you sense, Peter, that it's looking a bit wobbly in terms of that evidence, or is it fairly unequivocal stuff to you that this is a blatant miscarriage of justice? Where on the scale are you of that analysis?
Well, I think before today, I would have said that it appeared to me to be a severe miscarriage of justice, but that was just me. I don't know how much you saw of the Shuley press conference this morning in London. It is devastating to the prosecution case. It simply tears it to pieces. And the fundamental objection of those who are worried about this case is that it's not at all clear that any crimes took place at all. And I think what came very much out of Dr. Shuley's evidence and the panel which he's assembled to look into all these cases is that the babies which died and the babies which suffered and appeared to have been harmed did not suffer and did not die as a result of the acts of a murderer, but because of serious problems in that hospital. And that, I think, is now quite clear. And also the use of Dr. Lee's own paper in this, which he wasn't really aware of when the trial was going on, because he lives on a farm in Alberta in the middle of Canada. When he found out about the use that had been made of his paper, he was dismayed. And I think his sense of justice, when he found out that he couldn't actually do anything about it on the appeal court, wasn't really interested in hearing what he had to say, led him to get together this extraordinary assembly, as I say, of really high-quality experts who just took the cases one by one. We didn't hear them all at the press conference this morning, but I believe that, in fact, the rest of the work is very similar to what we did here. I think that those who continue to insist that the prosecution holds water are really in very deep trouble now.
Yeah. Many people, understandably, Peter, will look at this, and of course we've seen previous miscarriages of justice in all sorts of areas of criminality and types of crime. But many would say, well, hang on, look, this was a very lengthy court case. There was a lot of experts were speaking on this. They didn't all get together in a room and cook up some kind of shady prosecution against one woman. They would have looked at all manner of issues, laws of probability, what was likely to happen, who was on shift at that time, etc. So when you take the entirety, the full body of everything, and then you show that to the jury, they clearly believe that something was awry here, and Lucy Letby was responsible for it. Were they all making it up?
No, the whole point of this is that the jury was simply not told large amounts of what we now know, and this is partly because, for reasons which nobody knows and probably nobody ever will know, the defence never fielded a medical expert to counter what was being said by Dr. Dowie Evans on the other side. It just wasn't done. And although what he said was challenged by Lucy Letby's defence team, that doesn't count as evidence. The jury don't have to consider it, however much of they put Dowie Evans through the ringer on the witness stand. It doesn't actually count as evidence, and therefore they can't consider it. And this extraordinary hole in the trial that she had no expert called to speak on her behalf has remained a real problem. What happened today was really we saw what such an expert could have done if he had been called into the witness box, and it completely transforms everything.
Our previous guest, who's a criminologist, Dr. Hannah Quirk, was saying that there are now difficulties potentially in getting evidence or getting this reviewed because the defence should have introduced a clinical evidence at the trial. And if it's something they could have done then but didn't, then that may be a big red light against taking this further.
Well, that's already been what the appeal court has said. They wouldn't take into account what they were told in the application for Lucy Letby's appeal, which she is. It's not that her appeal has been refused; it's that she's been denied leave to appeal. She's never had the chance to appeal, and the problem of Dr. Shuli's interesting paper on skin discoloration and air embolism, which was crucial in prosecution evidence, was one which the appeal judges said, well, you should have brought that up in the first place, and since you didn't, it's not our affair. Now, in fact, there have been cases in the past, and my friend and colleague David Rose, who now writes for Unheard, has pointed this out on your station, that in the past appeal court judges have not taken this view. They've said, okay, what we're interested in here fundamentally is justice. And the fact that it wasn't brought up in the first trial, it doesn't mean that we should exclude it for that reason. If it's relevant to the safety of the conviction, it should be heard. And I think the judges really ought to take that view. If they won't take that view, then the Criminal Case Review Commission has a chance to do so and to compel the appeal court to hear the case, or whatever it is that happens. I mean, there are two possibilities: one, an appeal against the convictions, and the other, a retrial. I don't know which will eventuate, but what is certain for me is that after what happened today, it's impossible to leave things as they are. Sooner or later, there is going to be a reckoning. I really hope sooner, because Ms. Letby is 35 years old, and if she has to spend 10 years in prison waiting for lawyers to sort themselves out, then I think that would be a gross injustice.
Do you really sense, Peter, that Lucy Letby will be free one day?
Well, I've thought for a long time that she almost certainly will be free one day, because the weakness of the case is so apparent. But the problem with these systems is they move extremely slowly, and what my fear has always been, it could be 10 or 20 years from now. I really hope that this will shorten that. It seems to me to be quite wrong if there's a serious suspicion that a conviction is unsafe, that someone should be left to sit in prison for year after year after year simply because of procedure. Yeah. It's just wrong. Obviously, you shouldn't be able to reopen every case on a whim, but this is far more than a whim. The people who Shuli assembled to examine these cases are absolutely extraordinarily qualified and talented and knowledgeable. Yeah. And if you get a chance to read the whole thing, it will astound you how powerful and how well worked out their messages. And Dr. Lee himself is an extremely impressive man, I found. There's no histrionics here at all, just a cool and careful dismantling of a case which now seems to me to be lying in ruins on the floor.
Peter, thank you for your time. Peter Hitchens, columnist, Mail on Sunday, who's taken a keen interest and gone even further, as you heard his words there on this Lucy Letby case. I don't know. I've got no idea at all, other than having that initial view that I think a lot of people did. It's like, why are people going, she didn't do it? You know, there's no evidence except, well, you know, massive court case, all of those expert witnesses, none for the defence. Interesting. What's that all about? And now the man whose paper that he wrote 30 years ago was used by the prosecution. I think the argument is from Dr. Shu Lee that it was used inaccurately by the prosecution, was never challenged by the defence in that respect. I mean, Dr. Shu Lee would have been if you thought the prosecution were coming up with this, maybe the defence thought, well, looks a bit iffy, we can't argue against this doctor, he's very eminent and respected. I have no idea, but certainly this is massively interesting, I think, for everybody concerned. But we must remember still, there are 7 bereaved families still out there, regardless of what happened. And there are many other families as well, hugely affected by what happened to their children. 0344 499 1000.
Government borrowing costs hit a 27-year high, and the pound is taking a pounding. Gloomy economic data is expected to show inflation and growth are off course.
Let me ask again, and can you please be clear? Will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this Parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence, and she has the full confidence of the entire party.
Can Rachel Reeves hold on as Chancellor?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is talk.
Here's an absolute beauty that I just spotted as well. When I say beauty, I mean gobsmacking. Asylum... You always know where I'm going already. Asylum seekers and refugees have been given taxpayer-funded... Taxpayer-funded what? We could do a whole feature on this. Taxpayer-funded mobile phone... Well, you know about the mobile phones. Clothes? Know about the clothes. Taxpayer-funded PlayStations and DJ lessons by councils who spent millions to host new arrivals. Newcomers in hotels have been provided with game consoles, yoga classes paid for by the public purse, with funding also being used to buy refugees and asylum seekers driving lessons, tickets to football match and instructions in circus skills. I'm not making this up. You're going to hear a lot about this in the next 24 hours. Local authorities spent, are you ready, since 2022, £141 million on these extra initiatives, according to a Daily Telegraph audit which provides a snapshot of how 110 councils are using funding. These services have been paid for by local authorities, despite growing pressures on the public purse. So, collectively, these local authorities, remember, they're not collecting your bins. The potholes are growing ever wider by the day. But somebody is spending £141 million on circus skills for some asylum seekers and the odd driving lesson as well. Nice work if you can get it. Rupert Lowe, the Reform MP, branded the spending disgraceful. He said not just those claiming asylum, but every single successful refugee approval needs to be reviewed. The system is broken and wide open to abuse. And they wonder why, you know, Reform UK there's no one that could say that's a good use of money. I know that there's going to be some kind of bizarre, slightly bonkers leftist response to this, which will be, right, OK, this is the reason why we paid for the circus skills. And the same reason why the foreign aid budget went to give a donation of money to a Spice Girls tribute act in Pakistan or something. I think that's a true story, by the way. There will be a reason given for it. It's pure insanity. What message does this send to millions looking to make the journey? No computer games, driving lessons, phones, laptops or whatever else. They should receive a one-way plane ticket, he said. This is Rupert Lowe. He said, overall, the waste is simply staggering. How can the drain on the public purse be justified at a time when we're all being asked to pay so much more? I am genuinely lost for words on that. Circus skills, yoga classes. Mate, what is happening out there? Let's go back to where we began in Bromley. This is Mick on Islamophobia and the terminology. Mick, what are your thoughts?
Hi, yeah, I'm absolutely sick to death of hearing about this blasphemy laws.
Yeah.
Everyone says, oh, it's not an Islam problem. It is an Islam problem. We don't have any other religion going out on a rampage, killing people, stabbing people, chasing people out of their schools, teachers in hiding because of them. And every time we hear about it, you have to bring up all these other religions. Oh, it's the Christians do this, and because everybody's terrified of them, even yourself and the other reporters. Every single time you have.
There is. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you why that is, Mick. Because it is. You know, firstly, there is a journalistic responsibility, because you might not be a half-wit, I might not be a half-wit, but there's a lot of people out there that will take any kind of terrible story and choose to define an entire group of people by it. We wouldn't do that in any other walk of life, so it's important that you sometimes still have to throw that out.
An entire group of people. The whole point of the Quran is the destruction of Western life and the kafir, which is us.
I've got a funny feeling, and I'm not trying to be PC about this. I've got a funny feeling that a scholar of the Quran, of Quranic studies, would sit here and tell you that that's not true. Now, I know that in the same way, and I'm going to do what you've just accused me of, the same way that the Bible, have you read some of the stuff that's written in the Bible? It's horrific. But it depends where you read it or which bit you read. That I'm pretty sure they would refute that.
They're not going out and killing people in the street, are they?
No, but neither's the average Muslim or the average anybody, are they?
No, but they are doing it, and none of the Christians are doing it. You tell me when the last time a Christian stabbed someone to death in the street. You can't, because it doesn't happen. There's one religion that does that, and that's Islam. It's always the same people. You can't talk about them. You can't even talk.
But are you not allowed to distinguish between Islam and political Islamism?
No, I don't.
So my doctor down the end of the road, who I've cited before, who's a very peaceful man and a man of faith, you think he supports that?
Well, he goes down the mosque with all the rest of them. Is he standing up?
Well, he goes down the mosque with people. He goes down the mosque with people like him.
Did he stand up for them? Was he out there saying, how many Muslims have you heard on the news standing up for them 3 little kids that got stabbed to death? None of them, because they all believe in the same thing.
But that's nothing to do. Southport was nothing to do with Islam.
Oh, come on! If it's nothing to do with Islam, you must be living in cloud cuckoo land.
Well, no, I've just read the entirety of the case against the killer.
Do you know what I mean? He had the ricin, he had all the rest of it. We know. You're going to have to kill
you know what else he had on there as well? He had a whole raft of...
What about all the others then? All the others, the London Bridge and all the rest of
it? No, but nobody's disputing that. I was just distinguishing Southport.
Where was your mate, the doctor, standing up for?
What's he meant to do? What's he meant to do? Where's he meant to go?
He's supposed to speak out. I don't see him speaking out against the other religions.
Why has he got to speak? I agree that areas like the Muslim Council of Britain should be louder on this. But their point is, if somebody carries out an act in the name of Christianity, is it your job to stand up then?
But they don't.
Well, of course, over the world, I reckon it would take me 2 clicks to find a case of an extreme Christian.
No, I'm talking about this country. I'm not talking about any
No,
other
I agree. I don't disagree with you on that point. I've made the list. I read the list out at the beginning.
Christians going out stabbing people on London Bridge. When did that last happen?
I totally agree. That is not the problem of the day. The problem of the day is Islamism.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's not the same. That's not the same as my doctor down the road or the fellow that runs the sweet shop in Dunton Green, right?
Where's that kid yesterday? You won't say that he's a Muslim. We all know. It's all over the internet that kid's a Muslim, but you're terrified of saying it.
No, that's not... Hang on. Can I just tell you that cannot be mentioned because there will be a court case. And there will be a court case that will establish those facts. There's all sorts on the internet, by the way, but responsible people and people who engage their brain don't go spouting that on social media because you could collapse a court case.
Now, we all know that you're terrified of saying anything because they'll come up.
Yeah, but I can't say anything about an ongoing criminal case. But the law of the land precludes me.
They're all ongoing, like the Southport one. They're all ongoing. You can't say anything.
Well, Southport's not ongoing. You can say what you like about Southport.
Yeah, you can now, but before you...
Of course you couldn't, because there's a court case. Because there's a court case, Mick. You can't do that.
Billy Liar didn't say anything, and we know it was. Don't know what's going on. He hid it all.
So if I wanted to say you're a prolific car thief, is that all right?
What, if a car thief's a prolific car thief? Of course you can say
No, if I want to say you're a prolific car thief.
Yeah, how's that the same as saying a Muslim who's going out...
I'm not talking about a Muslim. I'm talking about judging somebody before a case.
No, but yes, you're talking absolute rubbish.
No, I'm talking about the law of the land. Our forefathers, Mick...
Going out killing people, you call them a Muslim, don't you? There were black blokes going out stabbing everyone in London. You call the black blokes out on it because they're the ones who are stabbing it. It's not white people doing it.
And that we make that case every day of the week.
No, you don't know. This is
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. I don't think there's a week goes past where we don't mention knife crime, where both perpetrator and victim are largely going to be on average of 15 years of age and are black. That is mentioned all the time.
So why in London?
You need to clean your lug holes out, Mick.
It's not being done it. You know what I mean? You see their mums crying in the street about stop and search and all the rest of it. I don't see anybody calling it out and saying, "Oh no, this is."
100%. I never see Diane Abbott talk about it. I don't hear Sadiq. Listen, Mick, I've made the point a gazillion times. I've never heard Sadiq Khan get as animated about kids dying as he does about ULEZ cameras. I agree 100% on that.
None of you say odd little word. I don't see you going on the marches and doing anything about it. Do you? You're all right when Tommy Robinson gets banged up because he brings out all the stuff about that little kid who got bullied.
Well, no, he broke the law. That's why, and he admitted to it.
See, all the councillors taking back.
But he broke the law and admitted to it. But now you're going somewhere else, Mick.
No, No, it's not. It's actually proving what's going on.
Tommy Robinson broke the law. He asked people for money for his defence and then pleaded guilty.
No, absolute rubbish.
Yes, he did.
Absolute rubbish. You know what it is now. So why are you not calling it out then that little kid is a scumbag?
Why? Hang on a second. So you're going to base that on what? Watching an iffy documentary?
On what I saw live.
Yeah, what you saw on Tommy's documentary? Come on, Mick. You're bigger than that, mate.
You see the councillors giving people money. They was taking backhanders.
Councillors giving people money? I've got no idea whether I've got no idea. I'm not going to base. Do you think I'm going to base a new opinion on a case? By the way, if there's a revision of that case, I'll be the first to support it. You don't do that by making your own documentary and having selective witnesses that aren't counted. It might be seductive. I thought it was, I thought there was some powerful stuff in there too. But that's not how you're going to change the system.
Money to keep quiet. You said nothing. They've all admitted taking money to stay quiet.
Who's admitted taking money? But we've got to be careful here, so I don't know if I actually want you to answer that. I don't know whether... Well, I'm not sure that's absolutely true, and I can't allow it to go on air without... Because someone might sue you, Mick, and me, and then we both end up in the chiller, probably in the cell next to Tommy.
Your purpose is you won't go and look at it. You tonight, then go and look at that video. You watch it. You see the councillor.
I watched it. I literally watched it, Mick. I watched it. It was so because it was so journalistically sloppy. I couldn't take it seriously.
Live video.
I couldn't take it seriously. No, that doesn't work like that, mate. Have you never heard of people taking an element or a snapshot or something? You need a lawyer.
No, they said it to your face. We took money to keep quiet about this kid.
OK, I don't know who that person is. I don't know whether we can verify that story. That story needs to be stood up journalistically. You can't just play somebody with a blurred out face and say, oh, that's what happened.
Yeah, so why have none of them been done for lying then, for saying they're teachers? Well,
if they have, why have they not? Maybe they didn't.
Never done it.
Maybe they didn't.
The way you think, mate.
No, it's not, mate. It's not the way I think.
It is the way you think because you don't call them out.
Why would I call out something I can't prove?
You can prove this.
Well, by showing a Tommy Robinson video.
Every time I have an argument, you say you go on the internet and find out. When I go on the internet and find out, I'm in the wrong. How does that work?
I haven't said you go on the internet and find out. I've said you should always double...
You said it earlier on. You said I can go anywhere in the world on the internet and I can prove this. Your exact words.
Prove what?
When I said about the Christians. You said I can go anywhere in the world and I'll find something out.
No, I said you could find cases if you wanted to, but right. I'm not arguing with you on the point of...
So why don't you do it the other way round then? It doesn't suit your narrative, does it?
What do you think I don't? Have you not heard what I said? Have you not heard what I said?
I've heard exactly what you said.
I said I've watched exactly what you've watched, and I cannot... And so based on that, I could not possibly, legally or journalistically, come on air and say, I've got the proof.
No, but what I'm saying is you don't say anything about it. You don't say anything at all. You hide it all away. That's why it's there.
I'm literally telling you now. I'm literally telling you now, mate.
People are sick to death of them.
I'm literally telling you now, mate. Listen, you and I have got more in common than we haven't, believe it or not. But what I can't do is I can't break the law of the land. I can't use guesswork in order to corroborate a fact or an attempted fact. And I can't make shizzle up just because it suits my anger or my political opinion.
You're a journalist. Mike Graham's a really good journalist. They're all brilliant journalists. But none of you look into any of this, do you?
Well,
why have you looked into it?
Some of us do look into it. And
no, you don't. Why have you looked into that video then? Why have you not looked into it?
Well, I just told you I did.
No, you haven't. No, you haven't. You said you watched it.
Yeah, I watched it, and based on...
You didn't look into it, did you?
Okay, if I told you, okay, and I wasn't going to mention this, but now you've... If I told you I've got a lawyer looking at that, would that help a little bit?
Why didn't you tell us that? So why didn't you tell us?
Why do I have to tell you what I'm doing? I'm not running a commentary on my bloody life, mate.
No, but then people like me who are watching it, listen to people like you who don't say anything about it at all.
Yeah, but you'd never, in a million years, you'd never watch a video that had been put together like that. Your first position would be, right, this is probably going to be full of errors, mistakes, and stuff that are... That would be your starting position, wouldn't it?
No, it wouldn't. No.
Well, it is mine. When I watch any documentary, I just assume...
That's what I'm saying. That suits your narrative, but you don't want to look at it from anybody else's point of view.
Well, yeah, there's I mean, I could look at it from lots of points of view. I'd be here all day doing that. Listen, Mick, you've been very, very animated, and there's nothing wrong with that, mate. Thank you. Mick in Bromley. He's not a happy bunny, particularly with us lot here. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 4:45. I think that's the time. Let's move to the... I've lost track after the last call from Mick. Beijing has responded to Donald Trump's 10% levy on Chinese imports. They've announced their own tariffs. Now new taxes on US goods like oil, gas and coal are scheduled from next Monday. Meanwhile, the US president says he's pleased to have reached a border security deal with Canada to delay tariffs by a month, like he did with Mexico earlier yesterday. Let's speak to Laurie Laird, economist and US political commentator. Laurie, good afternoon to you. If we were marking Donald Trump's homework on this, bearing in mind, what he was setting out to try and achieve, how's he doing?
I mean, Donald, he's done something miraculous. He managed to clean up a mess of his own making. Well done. And he's now trumpeting that as a success. I think the fact that these initial tariffs against Mexico and Canada, which are bigger trading partners than China for the U.S., the fact these tariffs did not go into effect on Tuesday as initially, or midnight last night U.S. time, as initially announced, is pretty good news for U.S. consumers. It's difficult to see that had these tariffs gone into effect, that wouldn't have led to higher prices across the board for U.S. consumers. And remember, Donald Trump was elected to bring inflation down, right? This is one of the things he could actually claim a mandate for. But if you put tariffs on items, the person who pays for this tariff isn't some faceless, nameless Mexican company. It's the importer. It's the American company that has said, I want to buy Mexican oil, Mexican steel.
Yeah.
They pay this. typically they pass that increased price on to consumers. So it's a remarkable way for Donald Trump to say, I'm going to tame inflation, and yet he got people to believe it. It's remarkable.
Well, it's interesting, although, you know, he didn't invent the notion of tariffs, of course. I mean, they have existed for and implied in various ways. He might say, hang on a second, look, I was going to put tariffs on Mexico. I had a chat with the president over there. She said, oh, God, don't do that. Here's 10,000 soldiers we're going to stick on the border. Trump will go, job done, surely. A perfect result.
Absolutely. No, and he can present this as a win, and I think most Americans will view this as a win. This has got a lot of coverage, a lot more coverage than most economic events in the U.S., but I would still venture that most Americans are not following this, you know, kind of blow by blow the way we are. So most Americans will say, hey, Donald Trump, economic victory, I feel a lot better.
I mean, this is going to be the direction of travel for Trump, or do you think he'll get bored with tariffs and move on to something else in a couple of weeks?
I mean, this is a really interesting question because he loves the word tariff, most beautiful word in the English language, right? He has said that he wants to zing Europe, and Donald Trump has always had a problem with the European Union. It's a collection of states, multilateralism. He doesn't like that. And I think this will be the next place he turns his sights. And I suspect that what he does with the European Union may well stick.
Yes, that is certainly the smart money is right there. In terms of what he does with the UK, he's gone, well, you know, the UK haven't behaved great. I don't know what he means by that, but apparently we've been very naughty. We're on the naughty step, that's for sure, for something or other. I'm not quite sure. Chagos Islands is my best guess, but we've done some...
David Lammy's comments.
Or maybe it's David, yeah.
David Lammy has done some gymnastics here, but some of his earlier comments were not all that flattering.
As has the new ambassador to America, of course, Peter Mandelson. But nonetheless, I mean, he's kind of said, oh, I think we can come to an agreement with the UK. So you think Britain is going to be all right on this?
Possibly, and I think Donald Trump, he likes the royal family. He's made that clear. He likes the fact that Britain came out of this big multilateral organization, the European Union. But look, do you want to be in a trade agreement with Donald Trump? Mexico and Canada are already in one, right? Didn't do them a whole lot of good. I think that the UK has to be wary of this. And I was surprised last Wednesday when Rachel Reeves gave her speech. She talked about a relationship with the U.S. above a relationship with the EU, yet you can argue that the EU's interests are more closely aligned with the UK than the US. Things like immigration, things like energy, trading energy, putting energy connectors between the UK and other places so that energy can be cheaper. More interest going that way than there are with the US.
So Donald Trump's first few weeks in office, let's finish where we started then, Laurie. Marks out of 10?
He's been busy. 10 for effort. He's got a whole lot done. Whether it's good for the country over the longer term, really too early to say.
We will watch with interest. Laurie, thank you as ever. Laurie Laird, economist and US political commentator. We could have pursued the tariff thing for a lot longer, but we are slightly short on time this afternoon. We're going to take a brief pause. Jeremy Kyle with us in a few moments' time. Lots more to come from us and from you. This is Talk.
And there's a sense that they kind of don't care about what the public thinks. There's a sense that they don't really give a monkeys because, you know, they know best. You know, they trot out this old thing that, you know, we're not the Tories, you know, they're evil, nasty, horrible people. We're the good guys. You know, everything we do is whiter than white. Everything we do is justifiable because we occupy the moral high ground. And the public is sick to death of it. That's why Keir Starmer is one of the most unpopular prime ministers in the history of Britain.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Rachel says, reference your last caller. That was Mick, wasn't it, in Bromley? Any other station would have cut him off. Well done, Talk. That's free speech in action. Darn right. I mean, he was quite animated, was Mick. I mean, I didn't totally disagree with a lot of what Mick said, as I hope was clear. And I get the anger. I understand the anger. But you have to make sure your anger is in the right place for the right reason. And all your you know, the one thing I've learned in this game, you've got to have all your ducks in a row before you open your gob. Because you only need one out of kilter and you're knackered. And you end up down a hellhole, I promise you. Del's in Glasgow on Islamophobia. Del, what have you got for us? Afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Ian. I've got a couple of points for you.
Yeah.
Islamophobia. Phobia, by definition, unless we've changed the English language, means an irrational fear that somebody else said earlier.
Correct.
Right? So, why should I be scared of Islam?
That's apparently the deal, yes.
Unless there's something they're not telling me.
Yeah.
And something they're hiding. Furthermore, on top of that, right, here's a reason you should be scared. All of these mosques that have opened up all over the place are advertised outside as centres of cultural and religious education, right?
Yeah.
That means that the staff inside and the clerics get paid as teachers, teaching assistants, etc., etc.
Go on.
Why should they get paid when the churches don't get paid? The priests get a stipend. They don't get paid by the local council like an education facility.
So if you are, so you're saying local authorities who are paying specifically Islamic teaching assistants
and teachers, the clerics get paid as head teachers.
But head teachers get paid everywhere, don't they?
Yeah, but not if you're a head priest in a church somewhere.
Oh, I see. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I've never really known much about that world of recruitment of heads.
All you got to do is type into your local council search engine.
Yep.
Mosque, and you'll see what favouritism they're getting.
Okay. Well, I'll take your word on that. I haven't.
You don't pay council tax if your Islamic house is registered as a place of prayer.
Yeah.
Right, that gets your council tax rebate.
How many people could conceivably do that?
Endless numbers, right?
I mean, if you had 30,000 Muslims living in a town or a borough, how many could apply for that status that would exempt them from council tax?
It's endless. All of them could.
I'd be interested to see the numbers on that. Listen, Del, there's no conspiracy here. I've got to move because we've literally reached the end of the show. He leaves us with a profound point and a question of which I cannot answer, but thank you to Del. in Glasgow. Jeremy Kyle is here, a man
That sounded very, very technical. I've replaced the wagon wheel with a cinnamon bun from Starbucks.
Ah, you've gone cinnamon bound.
How are you, boy?
I'm all right, you see, but I'm worried about the cinnamon.
You're worried about... Don't worry about... I don't understand the Islamophobia thing, do you? I'm just going to be really honest with people.
No, I don't understand it at all.
I didn't understand Brexit yesterday, so I spent the entire show talking about impressions of Keir Starmer, the voice coach.
Oh.
But today, the best story of all is not just that reform tops the opinion polls. It's asylum seekers and refugees have been given taxpayer-funded PlayStation to DJ lessons by councils who spent millions hosting our new arrivals.
You can't make it up.
Honestly, what are they playing?
Did you see some of them are getting circus skill training? Circus skill training.
Why?
OK, you've come from a troubled place.
Yes,
we're here to look after you. Yeah. Take these balls and have a juggle some. I mean, really?
Honestly, it does worry you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What were they playing?
Jump on that
Grand Theft
flipboard.
Auto, Animal Crossing. What's going on?
Get on that seesaw with the sea lion. Is that how to do?
What is wrong with the world?
Is that what's happening?
And then, of course, this other great story. We've got Blexley on. Why don't you the public say to the police, why don't you focus on crime instead of hate crimes? This is extraordinary. Have you heard about West Yorkshire Police?
Oh, this is amazing.
Has disclosed the true cost of its spending on diversity, equality and inclusion, though somebody's written equity here, for stuff, is £1 million.
£1 million.
And nobody can see a policeman or woman if they get burgled. The world's gone nuts.
The world's gone nuts.
Also, if you're in London, you're 90% sure to have your pocket picked. Pick a pocket.
Did you see that list of... the list of railway stations?
Yeah.
And the top 20 are all, like, London or
Why don't
London
we just go the whole hog? Instead of training asylum seekers to have circus things, why don't we just hone their pickpocketing skills?
Yeah.
Or is that an outrageous thing to suggest?
Well, there is that. And no, I don't imagine many people call the police if they get pickpocketed, do they?
No. I need to hear your Keir Starmer voice impression. I didn't do it yesterday.
5, 4, 3.
Why does that sound
2,
strangely...
1.
Strangely turns me on in a slightly
It's the voice it's because it's your ringtone, isn't it?
I beg your pardon? Let's not talk about my ringtone. So, yeah, lots going on the show today. Playtime for asylum seekers. Let's focus on real crime. Blexley's in. Reform topping the opinion polls.
I mean, that is massive significance because this is